I'm so excited that this episode is finally here. The histamine episode, I feel like histamine intolerance is really blowing up in the wellness and holistic education world, and so many people are seeing themselves in this picture of symptoms, including myself. And I have just the person for you that is going to break this down and help you to understand your body in a way that many of us never have before. Are you struggling with chronic, unexplained symptoms that no treatment seems to alleviate? And in fact, when you do all of the right, quote unquote, wellness things like supporting detox or gut protocols, you actually feel 10 times worse? Have you heard about histamine intolerance or high histamine symptoms and feel like this finally makes your body make sense, but you don't understand why your body is dealing with such high levels of histamine? Today, we're doing a deep dive on histamine intolerance, also known as MCAS or Mast Cell Activation Syndrome. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty of why it can cause all of these seemingly unrelated symptoms, like a racing heart at night, extreme water retention out of nowhere, paradoxical reactions to healthy foods like tomatoes and citrus fruit and strawberries and bone broth. Some other symptoms of this picture include hives, splotchy rashes on the skin after something as simple as a hot shower, dizziness, insomnia, depression, alternating diarrhea and constipation, lots of gut issues, and especially nausea. And are you someone who experiences these symptoms in flares, where sometimes they're present and you are just getting knocked down by your body and you look puffy and swollen and you can tell that you're not okay in your eyes. And then other times of the month or the year, you feel totally fine and can't figure out why? If this is you, you've probably been living with discomfort in your body for years that you've just come to think of as normal because you've had to just learn how to live with these strange symptoms and learn how to do your things and use the right random supplements that you've just learned along the way help you to manage them. Some of the strange symptoms that I've had as part of my histamine picture are things like waking up to pee, sometimes 6, even 10 times a night, especially after flying. Other symptoms you can experience are living with a never-ending eye twitch, chronic headaches, chronic neck or coat hanger pain, unrelenting fatigue, and so much more. If all of this is starting to sound like you, or some of this is starting to sound like you, this episode is for you. This episode is for the people who live their lives in highly sensitive bodies. For those who have to eat the perfect gluten, dairy, this, that free diet and sleep 10 hours a night and exercise just enough, but not too much, just to feel a little bit of normalcy when it feels like the rest of the world can go out until 3 a.m. and function on barely any sleep and just live their best lives. Today, I am sitting down with Michelle Shapiro, RD, a functional dietitian who's been on the show before. And since dealing with MCAS herself after a mold exposure combined with the double whammy of COVID, she has been able to deeply understand this condition within her own body and help clients that have not been able to get answers anywhere else. I see her as one of the leading histamine and MCAS experts, and I'm so happy to have her on the show. I actually started working with her around 6 months ago because I spent a weekend with her, and she finally helped me to identify this pattern within my own body after a lifetime of thinking that my insane sensitivities and all the hoops that I had to jump through to manage my health were normal. That's literally why I got into the health and wellness industry, because I'm like, my body does really weird things, and I feel like other people's bodies do too, so let's figure this out together. But essentially, I spent this weekend with her, and we were at a hotel in Austin, Texas, and I was telling her, I just get this weird rash after hot showers, but it's totally normal. My back will just be itchy for a few hours, and she's like, that's not normal. And she saw me like leaning my head against the wall and having this constant neck pain, and I'm like, yeah, that just happens to my neck after I hold my head up for a few hours. That's totally normal. She's like, that's not normal. And I started explaining all of these intricacies of my body that I just deal with. And she was like, have you ever heard of MCAS? And I was able to go to a provider and finally be able to find out that I had this pattern. She was the first practitioner that really connected the dots for me All of this explained why my gut is so sensitive, why mold sends me into the most insane flares while other people might be fine, why I've always felt terrible for days after exercise and thought I was just lazy, and why my body goes nuts after plane rides, just to name a few of the dots she connected. And that is exactly what she's going to do for you in this episode. She is going to help you connect your dots and validate you in such a beautiful way. We're not only going to talk about MCAS, what it is, why these symptoms happen, why our immune systems are stuck on overactivation mode and releasing so much histamine, and why it ultimately relates to our nervous systems. Surprise, surprise. But we're also going to talk about other overlapping disorders like POTS and hypermobility that strongly relate to and or predispose us to this condition. She's also going to explain why many, if not most, cases of long COVID are essentially MCAS, which is this immune and nervous system storm that will just not come down and causes all of this inflammation and fatigue and histamine symptoms in the body. This episode is just meant to validate your lived experience and explain the how and why, because we want you to feel like your own expert in terms of what your flares look like, what your triggers are, and what you can do to start recognizing patterns and managing symptoms by learning about your body and saying, oh, wait, this is probably histamine related. Let me start keeping track of what day I'm at in my cycle. Let me start keeping track of what foods or nervous system triggers might have triggered this cascade. We're going to spend most of this long, juicy episode just explaining the mechanisms. I know you guys love the science and the why behind things, and we just want you to completely understand what's happening in your body. But at the end, we totally start to get into solutions for those of you who want to start making a plan now that you know this is what you're dealing with. So of course, we're going to chat about things like a low histamine diet, supplements like DAO that you can take before meals to help you break down histamine, other supplements and tools and herbs like quercetin and nettle, and other supportive nervous system and gut healing herbs that help to address the root causes of this condition. And most importantly, we're going to talk about how slow you have to go when you're living in a hypersensitive body, and the supplements you shouldn't take and the things that you shouldn't do to push detox and to push your body too hard, and the way that you might have to kind of change your daily pace and your exercise regimen to accommodate what you now know is a very sensitive body. Michelle is also going to explain why it takes usually 3 months, that's the magic number, of either herbs or over-the-counter histamine, antihistamine meds to fully get your histamines down to a place where you can then start to manage them. And we talk about how to manage flares in the meantime while you're in the tamp down histamine phase. While we give all of those solutions and start to really get into the action items at the end of the episode, more than anything, I always want to bring it back to the ultimate truth, which is that MCAS is a disorder of the nervous system. The reason that our immune systems are so overactivated to the point where they think there is always a threat, and thus our immune cells are always releasing histamine, is because our nervous systems are in a place where they don't feel safe and or are being triggered by daily events and a lack of stress management tools and support in our life. So at the end of the day, this is a disorder of the nervous system, and regulating your nervous system is going to be the ultimate way out of MCAS, the ultimate way out of long COVID, the ultimate way out of all of these inflammatory symptoms that you may be experiencing. So you can do all the herbs and the supplements and the exercises and the compression socks and the electrolytes and the things that you must do to manage your flares. That's all great, but at the end of the day, getting to the root of the nervous system is your ultimate answer. So we are going to have a part 2 episode on what regulating your nervous system actually looks like and why that's where the hard work is. But obviously, in the meantime, again, you're going to learn about what's happening in your body today, and you're going to learn about a lot of things that you can do to start managing your symptoms and your flares. So keep an eye out for that part 2 episode. I'm really excited, and we're going to make sure that we give you literally every piece of information that we have. The last thing I want to mention is that towards the end of the episode, when we start getting into these specific supplements and tools and herbs that you can use to support your highly sensitive body, I mentioned a few different herbs. We talk about things like nettle and ginger and quercetin that you can use to actually directly lower your histamines and stabilize your mast cells. But I have a lot more that I've learned since going on my own histamine protocol about herbs that you can use. So Michelle actually created a course. It's called the Highly Sensitive Body Hub, and it's available on her website. I think there's like 12 to 15 practitioners that have contributed videos in their areas of expertise to help you learn more about flare management and getting to the root cause of this condition. And I did an entire module on herbs for histamine intolerance. So I have a ton of videos in there. I go through 5 different classes of herbs. I get very specific about the herbs for lowering histamine, blocking histamine and stabilizing mast cells, regulating your nervous system, bringing more blood flow, healing the gut. So if you want to learn more, if you are so excited by this episode and you just can't wait and you want to learn everything that there is about managing histamine symptoms, you can check out Michelle's Highly Sensitive Body Hub that is literally created for the people that we're talking to in this episode. So I will put a link to that in the show notes, and you can find, again, my modules in the herbal section. And I had a lot of fun making those videos, and we're going to continue adding more as time goes on and as we learn more. So we'd love to have you in the Highly Sensitive Body Hub. And let's just get right into it, because this entire topic blows my mind, and I hope it blows yours and gives you the answers that you have been looking for. Thank you guys, as always, for being along for the ride, and I hope you love this one. Okay, are you ready?
We feel each other's emotions.
It's everything. It's living my life intentionally.
That's the message, right?
Absolutely. There's no difference between our mental health and our physical health. It's the same exact thing.
And without further ado, let's get juicy.
So, Michelle Shapiro,
Livy.
this is not your first rodeo on What's the Juice podcast.
No, and I pray it won't be my last.
We're basically going to make it the Olivia and Michelle show at this point.
God.
The reason that it was so important to have you on this show again is because your first episode was wonderful. You walked us through anxiety and functional nutrition and all the things, and you showed us what real functional medicine is. And since then, you have essentially exploded in your own knowledge of something called MCAS, or histamine sensitivity. And we realized that so many people out there, whether they're dealing with long COVID, whether they're dealing with mystery chronic illness and unexplainable symptoms, are dealing with this histamine issue. And the internet's on fire with it right now, and you're the person that's going to explain it the right way and give us the real answers.
I hope so. I think we're going to do it together, actually.
Yeah. Well, you're the steward. So tell us who you're speaking to in this episode before we go into what MCAS is, because I want those folks who feel so alone and like their body is so sensitive and reactive to know that you're there with them.
100%. So the first thing I want to say is that even seeing the word histamine online, I don't feel that people are getting any information from it. Because when we hear the word histamines at all, we just think of allergies, right? Like we take an antihistamine drug for seasonal allergies. We do not think of histamines as being this driver of these symptoms that really we would classify as mysterious, undiagnosable symptoms that people just can't understand about their own bodies. The reason why I'm so passionate about this is that my clients have had very unique experiences around it. I've been a dietitian for close to 10 years. And in that time, I really worked in kind of 3 conditions: anxiety, gut issues, and how do you work with people to kind of have a body neutral relationship with food and with their bodies. And if they want to lose weight, they can still lose weight in a body neutral way. About 2 years ago, I had a mold exposure. And when you hear about a mold exposure in the functional medicine world, it's like, kill the mold, all this stuff, right?
Binders, infrared sauna,
Exactly.
hit it hard, antifungals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's always this like really hardcore approach. So I had a huge mold exposure in my apartment in Manhattan. And as a result of that, I then had COVID. And while I always throughout my life had these anxiety, gut issues, and I had, this history of 100-pound weight loss, I had this entirely new set of symptoms that came up. And all of my old tricks with how do I deal with anxiety, because I really was anxiety free for about 8 years. I mean, really anxiety free. If I had anxiety in my body, I would know exactly how to deal with it. This was like a new playground. And I noticed that and saw that in some of my clients. So I've had clients who, some of them for 5 years weekly. I know these people's bodies almost better than I know my own body, right?
Yeah.
And they would come in with symptoms that they'd never experienced before. So they were coming in. I had a client who maybe was coming to me to lose, weight. And they were coming to me for that reason, but they wanted to have a great relationship with food. And then like 3 years later, during COVID, they started having acid reflux and they started having really severe insomnia. And it was very atypical for these clients. And that's what I started to kind of see patterns in other people and myself. And I said, this thing is different. It's not those typical gut conditions you see or anxiety, but these new cluster of symptoms where people's bodies don't feel like their bodies in the same way. And they really don't have tools to help themselves out of these new weird cluster of symptoms that we're seeing really in the past few years.
Wow. So, this can happen to folks, as you're saying, as a result of COVID. It's what people are calling long haul COVID. It's these mystery, fatigue, neurological, heart racing, odd, again, class of symptoms that people have never had before that are popping up after this viral infection that was stronger than a lot of other viral infections we've been exposed to in our lifetime, perhaps. But there's also a group of people like myself that
An OG.
that were OGs in the histamine world. And unbeknownst to me, my whole life I had long COVID symptoms essentially. And I just was so used to being chronically ill that I did all the things. I really worked on my gut health over the years. People have seen me lose weight, get in shape, build muscle, do all the things. I've made progress, but I still had these lingering chronic symptoms that I had my whole life and thought were normal.
Right. Yeah.
And some people just have had these histamine issues all their life and just wondered why their bodies were so much more sensitive than everyone else's.
Yeah. I like that you use the word like their bodies were more sensitive. That really resonates with this population. We need to have a baseline understanding of the science of it, but I just want people to know as we go through the episode, we are going to go into that relatability piece a lot where you're going to say, oh, wait a second, that kind of sounds like me.
This is why I want people to hear this episode, because I know that there are other people out there who feel like they've gone to every doctor, they're doing all the things, and in fact, they need to do all the things.
They still have to. Yeah.
They have to.
Just have to do
they're
more.
finding themselves having to take way more supplements than other people to feel good, or go to the chiropractor or the massage therapist or whatever way more often than other people to just feel normal. So I was like, thinking to myself before we went to Austin, I was thinking to myself, it's so weird that I have to eat perfectly, exercise exactly 3 times a week, but not too hard, go to the acupuncturist, get 9 or 10 hours of sleep, not stress myself out too much, take quercetin, do all these things, and that's just to feel normal. And I wondered, is everyone else's bodies like this?
No.
And this is the population that we're talking to.
Exactly.
So right now we're seeing histamine intolerance, how to know if you have histamine issues all over social media. It's a very buzzy topic. A lot of functional medicine practitioners and physicians are doing posts on it or podcasts on it. And what I want to ask you is, what is MCAS? And is MCAS what people are referring to when they say histamine intolerance?
Yeah, so Mast Cell Activation Syndrome there's mast cell activation as a disorder that is inherited and you have, and then Mast Cell Activation Syndrome, and that's an important word here because it can also spontaneously come and spontaneously go away, which is interesting. Same as POTS, it's a syndrome. It's
Same
just
as
important.
IBS, it's a syndrome.
It's a syndrome.
It can come and go. There's no, quote, root cause necessarily or thing you can do or take, but the root cause is healing your body and your nervous system on a deeper level, just like with MCAS, but yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So mast cell activation syndrome is exactly like you said, when mast cells, the specific type of immune cell that lives in our connective tissue, in the hollow spaces of our body, this particular cell gets constantly activated to do its job, and the consequences of what happens when it constantly does its job. So many of our immune cells function in different ways, and our mast cells are really there to send signals to our body to fight viruses, to protect us from harm, to get blood flow going to certain places. So it's a very primary action of them to vasodilate. They want to get nutrients to the right place, they want to get blood supply to the right place, and they want to essentially create an environment where we can defend against ourselves. So what happens is they're a cell, something will attach to them, they're an immune cell, something will attach to them on one of their receptors on the outside, and then they will release a chemical that's basically like sending a letter to a different part of the body, essentially. And along the way, if you send a lot of those letters, there can be a buildup, and that can cause symptoms themselves. But in a normal world, these are highly intelligent cells that are doing incredible jobs at helping us with healing, at helping us with any sort of attack. Histamine is just one of those mediators that's released from, mediators meaning those letters that are being sent out from those mast cells. And histamine's particularly of interest to people because they are one of them that when when left unchecked, they build up in the body. There's too much released. They can cause a tremendous amount of symptoms.
Now, the way that our immune system works is that our immune cells, for example, mast cells, send out a variety of mediators, like you said. So when our immune system feels like it's under attack, when our immune system is activated or overactivated, it can send out things like histamines, but it can also send out things like cytokines, which people might be familiar with because of COVID.
Yeah.
So just to ground this in an example, when you heard people getting COVID having a cytokine storm, that was because our immune systems were mounting a very strong response to a very strong virus.
Yeah.
And thus, those beautiful immune cells that are trying to protect us released so many cytokines that it actually became counterproductive to our bodies. It was a storm. It was an overload of cytokines to the point where the body was like, nope, now those cytokines are hurting me. So this is kind of like histamine, where histamine also has a function in the body. We need to release histamine in response to stressors and viral infection.
Right.
Yes, it's part of our body.
Yeah.
But when we are too activated for too long, when the immune system doesn't come down after a viral infection, like long COVID, the immune system doesn't get the message that the threat is over, or when the nervous system is always activated, we're always stressed out, and thus the body is like, we must have a stressor to attack, the histamines are released too much for far too long, they build up, and it's almost a very similar phenomenon as a cytokine storm, where it's like a histamine storm.
Sure. I absolutely agree with that. And that is a really good way of laying it out too. The combination of what made COVID so particularly histamine or particularly mast cell inducing is that COVID itself, actually, there's receptors on our mast cell, the ACE2 receptors. Thank you, Lily Speckler. She talks about this a lot. She's the long COVID dietitian on Instagram. She's fantastic. But on the cell, there's ACE2 receptors, and that's where the COVID virus actually attaches.
That spike protein went on our ACE2 receptors.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's really weird because you're getting a lot of neurological nervous system type symptoms because you're attaching to the cell that has a very nervous system embedded reaction. So it was very interesting again in long COVID because people were experiencing and are still experiencing. And I think there's one document that Lily actually showed me too that showed that in some states up to 30% of people are experiencing COVID symptoms 3 months after the virus. And again, what you said that's so important, Olivia, it's not the virus attacking that's the problem. It's actually we're getting sick from the response that our body has.
Yeah.
And that's the key of this all, is that you have to change the way that your body's responding to things. And that's really hard when your body's constantly responding to things. So the cure can't be worse than the disease from even the internal environment of our body. And that's the problem.
It's such a good way to put it. And I want to almost break it down even further for people and ground it in the fact that when you have a cold, the cold symptoms that you experience are not the cold virus. The cold symptoms that you experience, like a stuffy nose, sniffling, coughing, all those things, are actually, that's driven by your body's own innate immune inflammatory response. So what all of those symptoms that you're feeling, none of those are the actual virus. It's your body's response to the virus, and you need those symptoms to get better. For those of us with MCAS and histamine overload and all these things, we have just been receiving too many histamines and other cell messengers, chemical messengers, for far too long because our immune system and, more importantly, our nervous systems have been activated for far too long.
Yeah, this COVID virus was impressive for a couple reasons. One of them being that, again, unfortunately attaches to the mast cells, which is like this very nervous system mediated. All of our immune system is mediated by the nervous system. Mast cells are really mediated by the nervous system. And none of us realized what a metabolic immune system and nervous system disadvantage we were at until this. And then we were like, oh my goodness, we didn't realize we were so nutrient deprived. We didn't realize we were so nervous system dysregulated until this happened. And it was, I mean, the virus itself is strong, of course, but the reaction from the body, we just weren't prepared really for this. And that's why we're seeing so much vast illness and fallout from it.
Yeah, that's why it was, it not only caused a lot of death, but even now that it's essentially, hopefully mutated down a bit and become less virulent, we're still seeing so many people have long-term issues from it. And it's because of what you're saying, this way in which the nature of the virus itself and where this virus specifically chooses to bind are these sites where our immune system is just going to go crazy.
100%.
Why is MCAS so hard to get diagnosed?
if you have basically a major feature of MCAS and POTS, which is another condition we're going to talk about. So Mast Cell Activation Syndrome and POTS, P-O-T-S, Postural Orthostatic Tachycardia Syndrome, which means that when you go from sitting to standing, there's changes in your heart rate and blood pressure to a certain degree. Really heart rate, but your blood pressure often does change as well. So what's characteristic of these conditions is that they are dysfunctions of the nervous system. But where do you get diagnosed for POTS? People think of POTS as when you stand up and you black out, that kind of sensation.
Yeah.
Where do you think someone will get diagnosed for that?
Well, from you, I know that they go to the cardiologist because their heart is racing or they're fainting or they're dizzy. And so these feel like cardiac symptoms.
Exactly. So that's a cardiologist's job. They'll do a tilt table test. They'll literally lay you down at a table and make you move in certain ways and see how much your heart rate changes, essentially. But the heart rate change is a symptom. It's not actually from a dysfunction of the heart in most cases. It's a dysfunction of the nervous system because our nervous system is what tells our body where to send blood and when, and where to send supplies in the body. So here's the really frustrating part. You have this condition that is extremely uncomfortable and for many people quite debilitating, and they're going to a regular doctor. Let's say you go first to a primary care doctor. They're probably not going to pick up on it. It's very rare they pick up on it. Then you go to a cardiologist. They have to specialize in POTS for them to even test you for it in the first place. Let's say they do pick up on it. It's not a heart condition.
Yeah.
So what interventions, where do you even go? There's no nerve. There's a neurologist, but neurologists often, unless you're a specific type of interventional neurologist, you're really not going to get those answers in a conventional doctor's office. If you go to a functional medicine doctor, they're going to be trying to treat the mold, the parasites, the SIBO. They're not treating your reaction to those protocols. So it becomes really hard to get this thing diagnosed. And by diagnostic measures, we'll kind of go through each of these conditions and what we call the triad. It's just really hard to get diagnosed. So what happens is people have severe symptoms and they have no place to get them diagnosed and no place to get help for them, which lands right in my lap because this is my favorite place to be, is for people who feel like they're backed into a corner. That's why I'm a dietitian in the first place, is I want to help those people. Those are my people. So MCAS is also distinctly hard to get diagnosed because there's really, the only way you can measure it is those mast cells, those guys on the watchtower or the ladies on the watchtower, they release chemical messengers when they feel provoked, let's call it, right? The only way you can really diagnose this is if you see what they release. So you can check for histamine in your blood, you can check for tryptase in your blood, but it's extreme. That's not where it lives most of the time. It's not, the mast cells don't live in your blood necessarily. They live in connective tissue. So it's really hard to get a diagnosis, and there is no gold standard outside of symptom and pattern recognition to diagnose it, unfortunately.
What I'm hearing from you is that mast cells are a normal part of our immune system. And they send out normal chemical messengers like histamine that create symptoms that are very general because they're part of what our body does. We can get a rash, we can get digestive distress, we can get a heart racing moment. And so it is so hard to get diagnosed because it is simply a form of immune dysfunction where our normal immune and messenger cells are just sending out their chemical messengers in abnormal amounts and at abnormal times.
100%.
And so people can just experience these very vague symptoms and they'll never understand that it's attributed to histamine.
Yeah.
So how did you find out, how did you first connect the dots that long COVID was a histamine issue, a mast cell activation syndrome issue?
Yeah, I do believe that much of long COVID is that. There's a lot of other ways that the actual virus damages your endothelial cells. There's a lot of other things that happen, obviously, with the virus itself. It attacks your mitochondria. Your mitochondria then can produce energy. There's a tremendous amount of reasons, but this particular pathway was so fascinating to me because I had this mold exposure. I then had this neck injury, which is hypermobility, the other piece of this triad we haven't talked about, but all of that came together, and what it looked like for me in ways of symptoms was insomnia for many nights in a row, severe tremors, like shaking tremors, really uncomfortable. And I remember on my actual bachelorette night, I don't like drinks, so this was the night before my bachelorette, and I didn't sleep at all, and I was with my best friend, and he was like, do you have panic attack? Is this a panic attack? And I'm like, because I look like I'm having like a real like intense tremor episode. And I was like, I am calm as a cucumber in my brain. I'm like, it's not, and I know panic attacks. I had panic attacks for many years, I said, it's not happening in my brain. It's happening in my body. So that night I took a Pepsid because I had kind of heard at some point like this weird histamine thing because the mold, I had this word histamine in my head. Pepsid is actually, famotidine is an actual antihistamine drug. It works on the H2 receptors in your gut. So very interesting to me. And it actually made the tremors a lot better. And I was like, what is up with this? So I started researching histamines and COVID just because I somewhere at some point in time was like, something's going on with this histamine thing. And I also did have some allergy-like symptoms, but really not a lot, to be honest with you. So I found this study that showed that 55 non-hospitalized patients with COVID, they assessed them for 14 out of 16 symptoms and found that there was a marked improvement out of those 14. They assessed them for 16 symptoms and found that 14 out of 16 of these symptoms were dramatically better with the introduction of Pepsid. So I started being like, what the heck? This is an antacid drug that we've also been told we're so scared of PPIs. We're so scared of it's not a PPI, but so scared of antacid drugs. And I was fascinated that this study for long COVID, these mysterious symptoms, people were getting better from taking Pepsid over the counter. And I knew for myself, I was like, this was the only thing that helped stop tremors was Pepsid. And before I had all of the evidence, because we're still getting so many studies back about this now, I was using it as a recommendation with clients. I was just saying, go get it over the counter and let's see if it causes symptom reduction. And I had one client particularly that I want to speak on with this who, when we first started working together, had some anxiety. At some point after actually she got either the virus or got vaccinated or both in a similar time frame, she had an explosion of insomnia and paranoia. She went nights without sleeping. She started through doctor's prescription, of course, taking Ambien, taking trazodone. Not one drug would touch her sleep issues. Nothing. And can you imagine the fear and discomfort and trauma of going to doctors and like begging to be put to, like, she literally was like, please do anything to put me to sleep. And not these heavy duty drugs would not touch it. I said, let's try a Pepsid, because the way that I was experiencing her symptoms and watching her was there's this wakefulness with histamines particularly. And it's like, I call it like your eyes, you're zingy. It's a zingy kind of feeling. Your eyes are wide open, but you don't want them to be. And
yes.
You're like, why are my eyes wide open? And so we tried Pepsid with her. She slept perfectly, and she has not had one sleep problem since then, which is just unbelievable. And she was like, I think I'm afraid of sleep now. I'm like, it's not. It's a biological thing. It's not like we attribute it to these mental pieces, but there's something so physical going on.
Well, it's important what you said earlier about when you were having tremors and what could look to an external person like anxiety or a panic attack or a shaking from being in fear. You mentally were so extremely calm. This was a purely physical symptom that you were having. And in my experience of my histamine issues and symptoms, I want to share as much as I can of these tangible symptoms and what this can feel like in your body with you guys so that you can recognize it if you are going through this. But what it often felt like for me was, again, at night, for whatever reason, the symptoms can worsen at night. Maybe you can talk about the different times that the body likes to release histamine witching hour. But at night, I would just have this severe racing heart, even though I wasn't actually mentally anxious about anything. I would go through the list in my head. Okay, am I worried about work tomorrow? Am I worried about this situation? No, but my body feels like it's anxious and my body is uncomfortable and heart racing. So it's a very bodily sensation because it is physiological. These histamines, these cell signaling mediators are happening on a physical level, and they don't necessarily have to be affecting your mind.
No, but this is where I'm so grateful that I had these really rough, really a couple of months, but really up until a year of the most severe symptoms, because I am I'm a person who's worked so hard on my anxiety, and I have such a good relationship with anxiety that I was able to explore it. I'm really serious when I say that I feel so deeply for this population, because many people do not have a good relationship with anxiety already because they didn't experience panic attacks when they were a kid, So if this is new to you and you get this explosion of anxiety and physical symptoms and
heart racing,
can you imagine how scary that is, Olivia? Like for people, like for non-chronic illness girlies, especially who've never experienced it before, and you're up all night and you have no idea why, and no meditation's helping you, no nothing. You're doing everything right, but you're feeling worse. Like my heart is like in my stomach, even thinking about people's experience like that. So I'm glad it was me, honestly, because then I could see, wait a second, this feels different than this. And I can start to divvy up those symptoms. Same as you though. You're like, this is weird and feels different. And like, I'm fine. Checklists are fine. We're in Austin having an amazing time at Gabrielle Summit, you know, at Dr. Gabrielle Lyons Summit. What's going on? Why am I feeling so weird? Why am I waking up to pee 15 times in the middle of the night?
Yep.
What is going on with my body?
And I would notice that happened to me at certain times in my life. So when I would drink bone broth religiously, I would drink a cup of bone broth. 20 minutes later, my heart is racing out of my chest. And I could never figure out, why is it that bone broth all of a sudden gives me this physical anxiety? But again, I check in mentally and I'm like, I'm good. I'm just really annoyed that my heart is beating so fast that I can't feel normal right now. I was annoyed that my heart was beating fast. I wasn't anxious. So come to find out, bone broth is one of the highest histamine foods on the planet.
Sure is.
And I was also reacting like that to other high histamine foods like chocolate. And I just didn't realize it. Yeah. So I just want to clarify as well, you experienced this bout of mast cell activation syndrome, this histamine issue, exclusively after a mold exposure and a long COVID situation.
Yes,
it was the mix.
That's where it started.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's kind of three pieces, which is the mast cell piece, which is a certain set of symptoms, the POTS piece, which is a different set of symptoms, and the Ehlers-Danlos piece, which is a different set of symptoms. However, the reason we're talking about these three is not for our health, but because they're very related. It's not for fun. We're talking about them for a reason. These three conditions are extremely interrelated. When we think of the mast cell symptoms, we think of those really classic allergy symptoms, right? Like eczema, hives, rashes, congestion. Like that's like what you would take a Benadryl for, right? When I think about histamines in this context, I actually associate histamines with dizziness. I associate histamines with heart pounding. I associate histamines with insomnia, anxiety, depression, and other symptoms like that. Diarrhea, constipation, weirdly.
Nausea,
a lot of nausea, a lot of reflux, really severe stomach pain. And what I want people to understand is that if they're listening to this and going, yeah, but I could just have SIBO or parasites, I would say that these conditions are very clustered. So you'll get a set of symptoms usually together and they'll come in flares. That'll happen quite often, where if people are in a constant histamine flare, that's possible, where you're just like feel terrible all the time, that it's possible and tragic and hopefully ending soon. I hope so. Very, very much. But generally they'll come as a wave and there will be different triggers for these things. Mast cells are very sensitive to all types of changes in our environment and transitions. So they don't like different smells. They don't like being on airplanes. They don't like anything that doesn't feel comfortable and safe. And especially if they are so worked up and so sensitized, they are going to react to everything. Yeah. So this group of people, we're talking about, and Olivia, you coined this term this morning, highly sensitive bodies as opposed to highly sensitive people. I love that. They're also probably usually highly sensitive people too.
I'm sure.
The reason why these symptoms are so important for us to talk about is because a lot of the symptoms are driven by vital signs. So what I mean by that is like your blood pressure changes, your heart rate changes, you could get fevers from it. These are all things that are so alarming to people and so like, you got to go to the doctor for that thing. And then you're going to go to the doctor and probably not get diagnosed with anything. And I always advise people to go to the doctor. Go to the doctor if you feel anything and you want to go. I never tell people not to go to the doctor. Yep. But oftentimes you're going to have these very severe symptoms and they'll come in waves and they will be unexplained. And it's so weird that they're connected.
I think that's such an important distinction of if you're an MCAS person, yeah, you get the cyclical waves of symptoms. You know, you said before that different people can have different concentrations of symptoms. Same way that you do like a marketing concentration in your minor or your major at school. Yeah. I have a concentration in peeing a lot at night. You have a concentration in tremors.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
I sure do.
So I had been looking for years for an answer as to why I would in flares in certain times in my life get up to pee 1 million times a night. It would happen after I would be on a plane because that's when we get a histamine flare. It would happen when I was really stressed. It would happen before my period because I was going into a histamine flare. My body didn't like the change of the drop in hormones. Yep. And in general, because I was always kind of filled with some level of histamines because I've had mast cell activation for a very long time, I was always peeing way more frequently than other people. And now that my histamine symptoms are being managed through a protocol. I pee once a night, twice a night, maybe max, like a normal person. So there are even mast cells in the urethra and the bladder. And if you're someone who has a, quote, weakness here or a concentration of symptoms here, you can pee a lot at night. If you're someone who has more of a neurological weakness, maybe you can have tremors. If you're someone, or you can have an eye twitch. If you're someone who has more digestive weakness, you can have more digestive symptoms and diarrhea. And when you're in a histamine flare, you're having diarrhea all the time and you think it's IBS. So these are very strange but severe symptoms that kind of come and go, and nothing ever really helps them. You almost feel like you have to ride them.
Yes, and no one rides them. I like to say that mast cells like to show you your vulnerability. They like to show you your weakness and whatever that is. And not saying that anything about us is weak, but it shows you basically the number one thing you don't want to happen. I've never had the urinary symptoms, right? And I wouldn't really care if I had them, to be honest with you. But I hate being dizzy. Like, I just don't like the experience of being dizzy. So whenever my mast cells are trying to communicate with me, they're like, let's get Michelle's attention the strongest way we can. Let's get her real nice and good and dizzy. And let's keep her up all night. You know, that'll piss her off, right? You know, that's the way that our body kind of interacts with us. It's like, what's going to give the mast cells the best bang for their buck? I can't tell you how intelligent these cells are. I mean, and how they specifically send you the exact signal you probably don't want, honestly. The number one thing that you don't want, because it's also so familiar to you to have that symptom before. But every single person with these set of conditions can have different triggers and different responses. So if Olivia's on the plane and, you know, you don't like being smushed because then maybe your bladder is smushed or something, then your mast cells are, ooh, we're smushed. That's not good. Me being on a plane, I might not like the smells in the airplane. I'm very sensitive to smell. Look, that might throw off my mast cells. Our mast cells are responsive to every single one of our senses, and they can respond to emotions. They can respond to anything. So anything can trigger them, but there's a lot we can do when they're triggered anyway.
This just goes back to why this is a syndrome and not necessarily a disease or a condition, because it is basically sounding like a syndrome where someone's body is so pushed to its limit after either a lifetime of stress or a really bad illness like COVID or a mold exposure or whatever it is, and their body is pushed so hard that any sort of stressor on any of the senses pushes us further, because the body is saying, please slow down, please stop, I'm not okay.
Absolutely. It is a huge call to slow down. All of these conditions are a call to slow down and a call for us to face things in a way that we've never faced them before.
I've heard you describe it before as like an allergy to stress, essentially. That our bodies are so stressed, they're so at their max, the immune system's been pumping these mediators out for so long that the body experiences any little stressor that we should be able to handle as an allergic response.
Yeah, isn't that such a fascinating idea that it's almost like, again, you have a mental or physical stressor and your body becomes allergic to its own mediators. Like you said, Mast Cell Activation Syndrome is like being physically allergic to stress. And so for some people, when they experience stress in any mental or physical stress, they don't experience it in this like full body flared way. And by the way, sometimes people get away with it and sometimes we don't. It really depends on how much else our bucket is filled, but it really feels like you hit a point and there's kind of this like point of no return, which is really scary. And the way I think of it is, when it comes to these cluster of conditions, the things you can do keep getting smaller and smaller. And then you just start saying, I'm a person who can't do that. I'm a person who can't travel. I'm a person who can't go out to eat because of those foods. And that is just about the most dangerous thing about these conditions, is how deeply isolating they can be and how they can make us feel like our body is betraying us. And when we don't feel like our body's on our side, we feel like we have nowhere else to look. And our worlds get smaller and smaller with these conditions if we don't put the right things in place. Of course, there's things we can do.
Okay, so I'll give you guys an example because I want you to start seeing yourselves within this picture of cluster symptoms. And obviously everyone's symptoms are different, so you might not experience this at all. But one example of how this happened for me is over the last few years. I mean, I had a really big stressor during COVID because of everything that happened to my parents. So I can kind of trace it back, and also having COVID at that time, I can trace it back that all of these things definitely got worse for me after 2020. I got to the point where over the last few years, if I would push my body too hard, if I would drink at all, I can't even drink anymore because of how I feel with this, nor do I really want to, but if I would drink at all, if I would go out too many nights in a row or even too many weekends in a row in the summer with my friends, or if I would travel or was stressed or anything that was activating me, I would get to this point where I would have this eye thing happen, this weird eye thing where I would try to sleep. And as soon as I would get sleepy and go into REM and my eye would do the little twitching motion that it does when your eyes are closed and you're in REM sleep, I would have this sharp shooting, almost dry nerve pain in the back of my eye that would wake me right up. And it's not that I couldn't fall asleep. I was so tired, but every time I would slip into sleep, I would get the dry eye, zingy nerve pain in the back of my eye, and I would wake up. And it was like a torture chamber because I couldn't sleep for days. And initially I went to this optometrist. She's like, there's nothing wrong with your eye. I went to all these different specialists, and it would kind of resolve on its own after 3 or 4 days, as our mast cell flares do. But one day I said, you know what? Let me just try to take Benadryl. What if this is some kind of an allergy? And I took Benadryl, and not only could I sleep, because obviously Benadryl makes you sleepy, but as soon as I took the Benadryl and it hit, that sensation in the back of my eye and that almost nerve pain completely dissipated and would go away. So I started to realize, okay, this is some kind of an allergic response, but I don't know why it keeps happening. All I knew is it would happen when I was stressed. And so I became the person who traveled religiously with Benadryl, because any kind of symptom that I would have when I was traveling, the peeing, all these different things would suddenly get better with Benadryl. And so that was really the only tool that I knew how to use to help myself. And I was essentially self-medicating for this very real mast cell activation histamine disorder that I had.
Yeah, you actually wrote, I'm teasing you about this, but you wrote an article. Were interviewed on this magazine, and they asked, like, Olivia, what are your travel essentials? And you put Benadryl as number one, and you wrote, you always need Benadryl in an emergency. And I said, Olivia, unless you have a histamine problem, Benadryl's not helping you in any emergency in the entire world. If you get attacked by a bear, Benadryl's not helping you. You know, for most people, Benadryl does little more than maybe helps you sleep, but it doesn't fix you in an emergency, unless your emergency is that you have a lot of histamines floating around in your body and it's really uncomfortable.
Yes.
So again, for like people who have histamine issues, these drugs, and it's funny, you know, you're an herbalist, I'm a functional dietitian, and we're talking about Western medicine in this like really open way because we're both open to any tool on the table. But sometimes, and this is very honest, in mast cell activation syndrome, sometimes these interventions are extremely necessary and we don't knock them at all. And in fact, a lot of the clients that I work with mast cell activation syndrome, we are incorporating over-the-counter drugs as a part of it, just because sometimes force needs to be met with force. That's not usually the case with mast cells, but it's really important you're saying that too. And I know for you, traveling was a huge trigger. It's really a huge trigger for everyone with mast cell activation syndrome. It has every possible mast cell trigger that exists. It's like low oxygen, pressure changes, temperature changes. You're around people that are unfamiliar. You're in a flying object in the sky. There's every single thing that would make your body potentially think you're in danger. So it's quite triggering. But what's important for you is that you started to learn when Olivia travels, she may get a weird eye twitch. And when you talked about the eye twitch, I didn't want to miss this too, which is that this is very common with mast cell activation syndrome, which is that when your body feels rested enough at night, it jolts you up. And this is we never talked about this, by the way. I have another client who has this experience, and symptoms of mast cell activation syndrome get often a lot worse in postpartum. Whenever she is about to rest and about to fall asleep, she gets the kick on of the neurological and insomnia symptoms. So it's a lot better now, obviously, of course. But it's this very frustrating thing where your body it kind of feels like torturing you, but it's not doing it on purpose. And it doesn't mean to torture you. It's doing it to protect you, but it is torturous sometimes, these symptoms. And it's okay for us to say that. And I want to just lay that out for people, because you don't have to have torturous symptoms, but you can, and it's real if you have them.
So let's go into more of those symptoms, because I really want our listeners to be able to see themselves in this list of symptoms and resonate with how they're experiencing them in their body so that they can identify if this is something they're dealing with.
Absolutely, yeah. So again, the classic allergy symptoms you would see is redness, hives, anything that's like, again, either you would see on your skin, maybe an itchiness, and then also nasal congestion, facial congestion, tightness, and things like that you would expect from, why do I take an antihistamine drug for spring allergies? I would take this, right?
So is this a person who's just getting random rashes?
Definitely would look into it. If it was someone getting random rashes, definitely. Or consistent rashes. You also mentioned before that seasonally, you thought it was every 3 to 4 months or a transition, it's probably not a transition. It's probably in summer and winter that your symptoms are worse for a couple of reasons. One key feature of mast cell activation syndrome is having heat and temperature change intolerance. So being unable to tolerate temperature changes. Remember, your mast cells are looking out for any big changes, but particularly heat and cold are huge triggers for mast cells. I think we all should live in LA or something because it would be moderate and you
And I
thrive.
feel so much better in LA. This is the hallmark of a person's body when they have mast cell issues. You need the temperature to be exactly
72 degrees Fahrenheit
at all times, or else you're uncomfortable because your body can't regulate one way or the other. It can't cool you down and it can't heat you up properly.
Yeah, so one of the mast cell activation symptoms and POTS symptoms that we see a lot is when people take hot showers and then they get red splotches throughout their body, and they also feel quite dizzy in the hot shower. So again, it's funny, Olivia, because we talk about these things and you're like, you often even say it to me, you're like, oh, that's not normal. Like, not saying anyone being abnormal is bad, but no, it's not a part of it's
not normal to be
robust
splotchy
immune response. Yeah, exactly.
after a shower.
To be splotchy after a shower. No, it's not normal. It's not okay. It's not great. We might have to accept it a lot of the time, but no, it is a sign that something is off, right?
Okay.
So that's temperature changes and seeing rashes or dizziness while in hot temperatures like showers is something definitely where you're in this world of there's some blood pressure change or heart rate change or blood flow change.
What about when you're laying in bed and you get up to pee and you kind of see like the silver dots everywhere?
Yeah. So again, none of this is diagnostic, but I can relate these symptoms back to mast cell activation syndrome. For sure. That's really more POTS kind of symptom, but the visual changes that you see in POTS or mast cell, very common. There's something called visual snow, which is very common in POTS, which is when you actually see like blurred vision over you. I got a lot of floaters during the time too. This is often due to blood flow changes because our brain obviously needs a large amount of blood flow. And so if you don't get that adequate blood flow, you can't get enough nutrients to your eyes, and also you don't have enough blood flow to actually see things.
What about acid reflux? That's another symptom that you said can come along with
Oh,
MCAS.
yes. For people who haven't really had the experience of even understanding, when I say acid reflux, what it means is that acid reflux is not this classic burning kind of sensation. I almost have no clients who experience reflux and like burning. It's often when you feel this kind of gnawing hunger in the middle of the night or even during the day sometimes, but I say it's almost like an elf trying to break out of your stomach, and he's like just clawing at the walls of your stomach, and you're like, I have to eat something right now.
Yes.
But then you're also kind of nauseous and don't want to eat. So it's the feeling of being starved and hungry and full at the same time. It's that sensation. And histamines and reflux are extremely intercorrelated, but that is a key feature I see in this population too, is having pretty severe reflux and early satiety, lack of appetite as a result, a lot of stomach pain, and just full body pain.
I was having this insane, what I thought was hunger in the middle of the night. I thought I wasn't eating enough. And so I would get up and I would eat like, I don't know, some leftover chicken or like a jerky stick or something. And that wouldn't really help me. But when I would eat crackers or something that would sop up the acid, I didn't realize it was acid reflux. That would help me. So I started keeping bed crackers next to my bed, and I thought, again, it was
right. It's an
normal.
Olivia thing, right? Yeah.
Olivia just eats crackers in the middle of the night. But I was having acid reflux, which I was experiencing as a gnawing hunger in the middle of the night. A friend of mine had reflux while we were on vacation, and she experienced it as this burning sensation in her ears accompanied by nausea. So I think it's very important what you said, that acid reflux does not come on as that burning in the esophagus for most people. They have nausea or weird hunger.
And the reason that our girl was feeling that way is because the reason why we experience reflux symptoms is not only because we're producing too little or too much acid, but it's actually because acid gets displaced into the wrong place. So literally it can go into like where her ear canal is, and it's like burning and inflaming, and or it could be a nerve signal from the discomfort that you're experiencing, that vagus nerve connecting your brain, gut, and all the way down where you're going to start experiencing it there. So it's either your pain signal is activated or you are literally putting acid in the wrong places, unfortunately.
And the more acid that your body overproduces in the wrong place or gets displaced in the wrong place that ends up irritating your body, the more histamine you are going to release in response to that stressor of the acid, right? So it becomes a vicious cycle.
Yeah, I mean, particularly also the parietal cells of the lining of our gut also lend us to produce stomach acid, release stomach acid, as well as produce and release histamines. The reason why Pepcid is so potent and helpful, potentially, there's many mechanisms we're learning why, is actually because it acts on not making your stomach release a lot of acid. So this is something so important. A lot of people, when they go to functional medicine doctors, the new vibe right now is that all acid reflux is from low stomach acid. So if you're a person who has a histamine problem and you go to a doctor and they give you betaine HCl, you're taking stomach acid, right? You are going to have the gnarliest histamine flare 9 times out of 10 if you have a histamine issue, because stomach acid goes up, histamines go up. Histamines go up, stomach acid goes up. The very frustrating thing about our mast cells, amongst many, we love them, but we are frustrated by them, is that they have a bidirectional relationship with almost every mechanism in our body, which means that if you eat histamines, your body also releases more histamines. If you have more acid reflux, your body releases more histamines and more acid as a response. And our body does this for a couple of reasons, but mast cells are particularly frustrating for that reason as well.
And this is just important to point out in the symptom piece because A, you might be listening to this having histamine intolerance. You already know maybe that you have histamine intolerance and you're eating a low histamine diet, but you don't realize that acid reflux is a part of it. And it's important because when we get to the solutions piece of all of this, we're going to chat about how actually soothing some of that acid reflux is part of stopping that vicious cycle. Not meaning that you need to block your stomach acid entirely, but just soothing the gut lining, helping to reduce some of that excess acid in the wrong places is going to be really important as part of your plan going forward.
Absolutely. And I'll say it 100 times if I have to. I have no problem repeating things, which is that this population of people who have this cluster of symptoms and have histamine issues are going to react to any diet, supplement, medication, detox intervention the exact opposite way that people who do not have Mast Cell Activation Syndrome, POTS, and hypermobility are going to react. Their bodies do things exactly the opposite, it almost seems like, or very differently than other people's bodies are.
You told me that what helps other people, like for example, lemon water, or for example, exercise, will throw those of us with histamine issues into a flare. Why is that?
When it comes to like lemon water, particularly, like anything that is instigating to stomach acid, right, is going to be instigating to mast cells. There's also vitamin C in lemons. That could also be instigating to mast cells. The reason is that our body needs nutrients and vitamins and all of these things. But when our body has a little man on a watchtower looking out to make sure nothing changes, any change can create a response from our mast cells. So these are bodies that are in a great state of defense and protection. You cannot introduce strong interventions into that state. And these are also states where of the body where we're utilizing a tremendous amount of nutrients, particularly when we think about, mold and COVID and all these things that I had. Those things actually did not cause symptoms in me. What caused my huge break into this new level of symptomology was actually when I did a mold detox. So I did a mold detox. I did binders, I did glutathione, I did everything I needed to do in my most perfect functional nutrition, gorgeous curated plan. I took the first day of binders, I gained 15 pounds of fluid in like 3 days. And I had no idea what happened. And it's because the act of picking a fight within your body, which often happens in detox, you have to instigate things a little bit. You have to give nutrients. That created such a huge response from my body, from my immune system, from my mast cells, that I couldn't get any of the benefits of the detox because basically your body is a step ahead of the thing that you're doing. So you have to make sure any intervention you put into place isn't going to cause a flare. And in this population, taking a teaspoon of, food or a teaspoon of a supplement can cause a massive flare. You cannot treat the root cause of things in Mast Cell Activation Syndrome without addressing mast cells first. You can't do it. Your body won't let you do it. And I'll give one example about the lemon water that's in my personal life too, which is that on my honeymoon, we went to the Ojai Valley Inn and flew on the plane. I was like feeling kind of better at this point. I had kind of figured out the histamine thing a little bit. Got there, gorgeous, had an orange the second I landed, gorgeous lemon water, gorgeous ginger tea. I was so violently ill that night. I thought I had food poisoning. I'm like, I ate an orange. Like, how could I have food poisoning from the orange? My stomach was vicious. I was in excruciating pain. I was like, I think I'm gonna not live after. I was like, how far is the local nearest hospital, the Ojai Valley Inn, this gorgeous spa, amazing situation. But this is the reality of this set of symptoms for people, is that you are so ill from very unexpected things, and you don't even realize that those things are the things. Like you're fine with like vinegar and stuff versus I'm not, we have totally different triggers.
But oranges get me too. And it's important that you're saying this about oranges and vitamin C and lemon. Not only are citrus fruits acidic, which can worsen acid reflux, they contain vitamin C, which can overstimulate your immune response if you're already in nervous system and immune system overdrive. But they are also histamine releasing foods. And so oranges, lemons, things like that I had to learn from you were things that were making me worse, even though on a paper, in a scientific lens, I needed the nutrients within them and they were great for my liver and yada, yada, yada.
And great for clearing histamines, actually, funny enough, because the vitamin C helps to create DAO.
But I'm just thinking back to one of the sickest times I can remember in my recent history. I was in California in January and it was citrus season and I was eating probably 5 to 10 oranges a day from local trees on my friend's street. And I couldn't figure out why I was so sick and peeing every 5 seconds at night and feeling terrible. And I had 10, 15 pounds of fluid retention, because swelling and fluid retention is another huge symptom of MCAS. You can feel like from one day to the next, seemingly, you have literally 10 extra pounds of fluid on your body, your clothes don't fit, and you visually look completely different. And that's just from the histamine response.
That's exactly right. And again, really, let's be relatable, Olivia, and let's let people who are listening hear us when I say this. We're talking about doing wellness, spa, like most objectively healthy things. This is a group of people who, when you do objectively healthy things, they often make you feel horrible.
Yep.
So that's a way to know if your body's reacting to things opposite how other people's are. Again, that's where you might say maybe this is a histamine issue or something like that. These are we're talking about going to California and eating oranges here, right? We're talking about I'm at
living
a spa,
the life,
right? I'm going in a sauna. I'm going in a cold plunge. These are objectively healthy things that made us feel like we were on the brink of death, honestly.
You also said that the prototype of someone who has a histamine issue is someone who gets flares when they're exercising or even socializing too much.
Yeah, absolutely. So you and I are hyper social people. We love socializing. We love people. We love being around people. And at the time when I was really sickest, I could barely make eye contact by the end of the day. I was still seeing clients. I actually had a neck injury and was still during all this and was still seeing clients in a neck brace. But at the end of my client day, where normally I like to get on the phone and talk to people for 3 or 4 hours, as you know, I could not even be on the phone because my nervous system was so irritated by that. So that's so not me. I've always been so outgoing. I love socializing, but that's where I started to see, this is like my nervous system can't handle it. It's this real feeling in these conditions of a bottoming out, and you stop. And then you can't do anymore. And there's nothing you can do, it feels like.
Yep. And I think for me, whereas this was new for you, for me, we now know I've had MCAS my whole life, essentially. I've had these symptoms ever since I was a little kid.
Actually,
or maybe, MCAD.
Who knows?
But I've had these symptoms ever since I was a little kid. And I always thought and knew something is very wrong with me compared to other people. I am internally and fundamentally the most extroverted person in the world.
Ever.
And yet my whole life, I thought I was an introvert and identified as such because socializing always felt so depleting and overwhelming to me. And I almost couldn't come down the next day, or I just felt so overactivated from it. And so is it that I needed to socialize less? No, actually I needed to be true to myself and continue socializing. It's the most important thing for me as a human. I need it. But I was having a very hard time doing it for most of my life because I was so overstimulated and overwhelmed and inflamed by it.
This is such a key point, Olivia, which is that even though we're getting sick from these things, symptomatically, they're not bad for us. And that's the problem, is that the wisdom of it would tell you, if I fly to go to California for my honeymoon and I get really sick, I should never travel with my husband again. That's the information you would get from that. But you actually have to go against the information you're getting from it and just learn to slow down so that you can ultimately speed up, basically. But it's not the message that Olivia is not social or Olivia shouldn't be socializing. No, you need to socialize for your mast cells. It's that the things in the short term that you need to do are not the things that help you in the long term. Very, very, very frustratingly.
There's a YouTube comment that I received on the very first episode of this season. And Michelle and I have been planning to do this episode. So, of course, I called her as soon as I saw this YouTube comment. It's on Alexis's episode. This person said, I've been looking for help everywhere. I have an odd and curious case. That's probably rule number one that you have to ask. An odd and curious case. Ever since having COVID last July, second clue, because that's,
Ding, ding, ding.
characteristic. Ever since having COVID last July, I can only digest meat and meat products. It was literally overnight as if something short-circuited. I can't digest fiber or sugar carbs, no fruit, veggies, starches, grains, teas. They cause pain, hives, bloating, belching, acid reflux, farting, and constipation diarrhea. I can't even digest supplements or unsweetened herbal teas. So bizarre. Not even ginger tea. Also something that's going to increase your heat in your stomach and your reflux, even though it's extremely good for you. I saw a naturopath who suggested I follow my body's lead for now and try reintroducing other foods in a few months, 1 teaspoon at a time. But at the moment, I can't even digest vitamin C. This is the picture of someone who has
We were like,
MCAS.
thanks for the comment. And also, I'm so sorry you're having that experience. But this was exactly what we were. This is that person, right? This is an amazing person who's going to a naturopath for help. And the advice they're getting is, you're having this immune system issue, you're having these digestive issues. You need nutrients for that. You need these things. But every intervention is making this person feel worse.
Because they're temporarily so full of histamines and so full of an inflammatory immune response that you have to calm that down and stop it in its tracks before you can start to slowly put back in the things that you need to heal.
Absolutely. And by the way, to get histamines removed from your body, you need a tremendous amount of nutrients. That's the frustrating thing about this. You actually need vitamin C, but vitamin C can cause a histamine reaction. So really, exactly like you're saying, there is a pathway. By the way, I just want to give hope right in the middle of this. We've been talking about how hard these conditions are, but we've both never felt better. Like there is so much we can do. And I'm so hopeful. I've seen my clients and myself go from, Olivia, the darkest days of their lives to some of the best health they've ever experienced. So I just want people to know that even if you felt like you are that person who can't get help, you always can get help. You just have to be weird about it and go about it a different way.
Okay, so you've mentioned POTS. You've mentioned that there's the second set of symptoms where someone might have trouble going from sitting to standing, or someone might be in a hot shower and all of a sudden they feel dizzy and faint. That's not necessarily MCAS, it's POTS, but it's related to MCAS. Why is MCAS related to POTS? Why do people with MCAS go on to experience POTS? And kind of what is POTS high level?
Yeah, absolutely. So POTS is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, which means fast heart rate when you have positional changes, which means that if you go from sitting to standing, that's that sensation of blacking out almost. POTS is often very linked to long COVID. This is a set of symptoms that people experience. The symptoms of POTS feel more cardiac, even though they are or are not, as we said, at their root cardiac. So it's a lot more dizziness, pain, blood flow issues. And particularly what happens is when someone who has POTS or a flare of POTS stands up, their blood flow drops to their feet. So all of their blood drops to their feet. This is a sensation called blood pooling. And what blood pooling looks like for a lot of people is actually get redness. It looks like blood underneath the surface of your skin, which people might experience in the shower. So then your heart goes, oh my gosh, I need blood up here. You have to give me blood right now. So what your body does is it increases your heart rate to get your blood pumping back up through your legs to your heart. The conventional treatment of POTS is you wear compression socks. So you would literally wear socks. I wear them. You'd wear socks on your feet and it constricts and makes the blood pump up. The other treatments are eating a tremendous amount of salt, which is is recommended 10 grams of sodium. So 10,000 milligrams of sodium is what's recommended for POTS generally. Or people wear abdominal binders. So it's basically just smushing your body together to make blood pump up. What's very characteristic of POTS is having something called vasodilation, excessive vasodilation. Vasodilation is a very normal and very important body process, which basically means that your blood vessels widen, essentially, right? So if you're watching on YouTube, your blood vessels widen.
Mm-hmm. Like a tunnel.
Like a tunnel, exactly. And then if you need blood pumped, you need something called vasoconstriction. When you think of someone with high blood pressure, their blood's pumping a lot and it's very squeezy in there, right? Mm-hmm. People with POTS generally have an excessive amount of vasodilation, which means those blood vessels are open and they're not getting that juicy pump that you need, essentially. So histamines are amazing vasodilators, which means, and this is the ding, ding, ding part of the episode for people, by the way, which means that you could have these weird allergy, digestive, insomnia symptoms, and then they can turn into these weird blood flow symptoms. The reason that histamines do this vasodilation thing is so that your body can open up your kind of vessels, your blood vessels, so that nutrients can get through quicker, blood flow, oxygen can get through quicker in case, let's say you had a cut on your leg. Histamines will then open up blood flow so that you can get all those white blood cells in and get everything there, essentially. So it helps other immune cells to access sites and helps other particles to get to a location. So if every single day you have a lot of histamines, your blood vessels are wide open, the blood's not getting back up to your heart. So another tactic that people use to treat POTS symptomatically is they put their legs up on the wall. This will get the blood from the top of their feet down to their heart. Anything that gets blood flowing back up. The reason why people feel incredibly dizzy when they have POTS is because you don't get cerebral blood flow. You're not getting good, juicy blood flow to your brain.
Because the blood's stuck at the bottom.
The blood is stuck at the bottom. You don't get the pump back up. And what I think a lot of people miss in the long COVID puzzle is looking at these dizziness symptoms as a POTS symptom and not a histamine symptom. But histamine still, for me, is usually a root cause of POTS.
I was going to say, does everyone who has POTS have an excess of histamines that are eventually creating the POTS?
You know, I can't say every single person, but I will say that I feel very strongly that most people, if you have long COVID, you have POTS, you probably have a histamine issue. And the problem is, again, where are people going to get help with POTS? It's such a specific condition. If you're going to a cardiologist, that cardiologist is not talking about histamines with you, which means you can wear all the compression socks you want. You can recondition, which is an essential part of treating any of these conditions. And you're still not going to get much better potentially because you're not treating the root cause, which is that your blood vessels are constantly open because of histamines.
Is this why brain fog is so characteristic of long COVID, because you're not getting cerebral blood flow?
Exactly right. Yeah. That's one mechanism. Other is obviously there's like mitochondrial issues. The reason that this is all kind of a problem is because this third piece we're going to talk about, which is hypermobility, is that all three of these conditions have two things in common. They're related to the nervous system and they're related to connective tissue. And connective tissue is a layer of tissue that's in our blood vessels. It's a layer of muscle. It's a layer of a lot of the different junctions and joints in our body that we really need. When you are a person who is hypermobile or has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, it means that you have ligament laxity or joints that they're basically connective tissue disorders where you can't build that structural components of your body. But then if you can't build the structural components of your body, you can't build that piece of the connective tissue of your blood vessels, right? Which then leads to the not having as good of a pump and as not good of a vagal tone that would lead to parasympathetic or sympathetic interactions with your blood vessels. When doctors are treating POTS, right, they're treating the blood flow issue. That's what they're treating in these doctors' offices. That's why you eat salt. That's why you wear compression socks. What the root cause of POTS is, it is actually classified as a condition which is dysautonomia. It is literally a dysautonomic condition. It means dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system, which means the root cause treatment for POTS is treating the nervous system. Doesn't make sense to people. I don't understand, Michelle. That is because the nervous system controls where blood goes. It controls how your heart pumps. It controls if your vessels are pumping blood or if they're relaxing. So you cannot treat POTS. You can't treat dizziness. You can't treat any of this without treating the nervous system. And I just have to say how important that is too.
I also think a lot of people don't get diagnosed with POTS.
No, it's extremely hard to get diagnosed with POTS.
But they don't even know what it is, and they don't know how to get a diagnosis or what to look for or who to go to. And so what might someone who's having mystery symptoms with POTS experience on a daily basis?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So first of all, if you do want to get diagnosed with POTS, you can go to specific types of cardiologists who specialize in dysautonomia. They definitely exist and they're fantastic. There are also just POTS specific and dysautonomia specific clinics that you can go to. But what the experience of POTS is like is you might experience visual disturbances like we talked about before. Very common with people who have POTS is they have this thing called coat hanger pain, which is basically like across your back, kind of going up into your neck. There's something called upper cervical instability, which is characteristic of all of these conditions, which is you'll get a lot of neck pain. And it's really that the joints in your neck are loose. They're not stable. And that will lead to lack of blood flow to your brain, right? And then that's a huge issue too. It's very characteristic to have a lot of pain in POTS as well. A lot of different knee pain, lower back pain, episodes of pain. But I would say very characteristic would be dizziness. Heart rate changes is the main feature of it. That's the diagnostic feature of it.
You're walking up the stairs and it's not a lot of exercise, but your heart is racing for whatever reason. You're
100%.
getting up from being in your bed and all of a sudden your heart's racing, or your blood pressure drops. You start to see the little stars because your blood pressure is low. You're standing in the shower for too long and there's hot water, which is making you vasodilate more, and you're getting really dizzy or faint and you can't really raise your arms above your head because you're too tired.
Exactly. Yeah, fatigue is extremely common in POTS too. This is the condition where people start to really doubt themselves and start where their family members start saying, why can't you just be normal? And that kind of dialogue comes in, because the symptoms again seem like almost laziness or something. Like it seems like you're doing it on purpose, but you're so not, and you hate the symptoms so much. I do see a lot of visual disturbances because your occipital lobe in the back of your head is what controls your vision, and a lot of times people get very unstable there and have, again, that upper cervical instability. So it definitely can be a lot of symptoms, but it's a lot of mental symptoms that relate to that lack of blood flow, a lot of cardiac symptoms, a lot of deconditioning where you feel like you can't even walk half a block, but it's not related to your like athletic status. It feels like it's related to something else. And then temperature changes will throw people with POTS off really badly, just like mast cell or anything like that.
When I'm having a POTS flare or POTS symptoms, I also feel like I can't fully take a breath, or I feel like there's some kind of like fullness in my chest, or I feel like there's this, like, I think I've seen it called air hunger.
Yeah.
And I just feel like I'm constantly trying to take a breath, but those breaths are not feeding me and I'm not getting oxygen from them. And I also experience it as I have times where I'll get very brain foggy and disoriented and mentally fatigued. I feel like there's this heaviness in my head and behind my eyes and I can't focus, and drinking electrolytes will fix it right away. That is my signature POTS moment.
Right. And it's interesting because if you have Mast Cell Activation Syndrome and POTS, you're like, is this weird feeling the POTS thing or the MCAS thing? And it's not to throw labels on us for any reason, but it's like there's different things that are happening that we need to learn. So like, for instance, I like doing like tablescaping and throwing these events, but I will be on my feet the entire time. And then at the end of the day, I'm like, ooh, pushed it a little too far, because then I'll see my heart rate start to get erratic, or I'll start to get dizzy, like you said, or something like that. And then what that limit is of what we can tolerate, we hope over time as we work on it gets better and better and better. But there is no helping POTS without reconditioning your muscle and without reconditioning your nervous system.
And that's also why people with long COVID, when they're post-viral illness but still feeling terrible, they will not be able to exercise. They have exercise intolerance. They're totally fatigued.
Like exertional issues.
Yeah,
exactly.
They're totally fatigued. They can barely do a quarter of what they could do beforehand. And part of what helps that aspect of long COVID is exercise, because the reconditioning and because the pumping of the blood and all of those things, the blood flow, the nutrients getting to the brain is quite helpful. You just have to do it very, very slowly. And that's, like you said, healing POTS. You just do a little bit more each and every day. You give your body more of the salt, the electrolytes. You work on resting as much as possible to restore your nervous system health. And you just take it one day at a time.
Exactly. Yeah. And like we said before too, like excessive exercise for people in this population will cause, and even some exercise, even barely any exercise may cause tremendous flares. So everything you do has to be really slow. And there's actually something called the Chop-Levine protocol, which is specifically for people with POTS. And it's like really focusing again on postural focus, as in like, don't, throw yourself up like this and then think that it's not going to affect blood flow, right? Like making sure that you're in certain positions when you're exercising to start with, because walking can be really hard for people with POTS, to start with, because the blood flow is dropping down to your feet, whereby doing something maybe on their back or half seated might be a lot easier to start with.
All right. So hypermobility. Hypermobility is this condition where some or all of your joints hyperextend. And you posted on your Instagram stories the other day and pointed out your hypermobile knees.
Yeah, it's really funny.
If you're watching this and you've seen a picture of yourself standing and you see that your knees literally go back further than what is straight, right? If you look at a straight line, your knees actually go backwards versus forward when you're standing. And you find that when you're standing often, you are kind of leaning on that hyperextension versus leaning on your actual muscles in your core. That to me is like the hallmark of it. But why is this bodily joint experience of hypermobility related to these conditions.
These three conditions, which, you know, the amount of messages I got when I posted that we were doing this episode saying, why would hypermobility be related to histamines? Like, what are you talking about? Again, two things that tie these three conditions together, and we will define it, is I want people to remember this: connective tissue and nervous system dysregulation. Hypermobility is that hyperextending piece. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is a collection of either like hereditary or genetic connective tissue disorders. So what's happening is you are unable to build the structural components that hold you up, essentially, right? So you're unable to, or impaired to build those things. So again, and what the very fascinating thing about all of this is that these are, again, connective tissue disorders. Mast cells exist in your connective tissues. So if you have, what happens very often in people with hypermobility who go untreated is they may hyperextend and they may subluxate or dislocate joints, essentially. And when that happens, that causes a huge inflammatory response because your body is like, why did that just happen? Then your mast cells start to react. Then the histamines kick in. This is all cyclical. And then the histamines kick in, the vasodilation happens, the POTS kicks in, and it all happens together, essentially. So these conditions are extremely related in that way. What happens in a lot of these times, and what I see in a lot of people who are hypermobile, is they'll have a lot of pain, a lot of those POTS-like symptoms as well. And then they'll have, if they sit for too long, they're in pain. If they exercise too much, they're in pain. And they just can't seem to find a happy balance. It seems really hard without help. And what does happen very often, again, are these dislocations or subluxations, where basically if a joint moves out of place or slightly moves out of place, it's maybe because there's too much pressure on that joint, because, again, this is a nervous system related disorder. So I want to tie this together for a second. Our nervous system, as it relates to our brain, is what signals, like if we're talking right now, before I even speak, my brain is sending a signal to my mouth that it's okay to talk, right? Our brain signals where should we send blood flow in our body, right? What should we do with this? How do we send things there? So if you have an inherited connective tissue disorder like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, your body has probably an issue with sending blood flow places, and that's going to be related to your brain in two ways. A, it's a connective tissue thing, and B, it's a nervous system thing. I'll keep saying it, but your body will send basically blood flow to the wrong muscle groups. So yeah, if a joint gets loose, and that'll happen from pressure, or your body is like, I don't know, should I hold this person's entire body up with their lower back? Yes, the nervous system is dysregulated, so the nervous system's sending the wrong signal. Let's use the lower back for that. You should really be using your core to hold you up. We know this, like, don't lean on your knees when you're like lifting furniture or something. It's like, don't use your back, don't use your back. Your core is supposed to hold you up. So if you have a weakened core because you have Ehlers-Danlos, let's say, or you have hypermobility of some kind, and or you have POTS, or you have all these things, and then in addition to that, your brain is telling your back to hold you up, you're going to get a really, really rough, sore lower back. And that's when people throw their backs out kind of feeling. And then you're like out for like 4 days. And that has happened to me many, many times before.
So many times. I can't tell you how many times I've hurt my lower back, gone into spasm, had to go to 3 chiropractors, massage therapists, all these different things. And again, just thought it was normal.
My story kind of hit a peak when I went to a chiropractor when I moved from Manhattan to Fort Lee. I started driving more because I had always lived in Manhattan my whole adult life. So I started driving more, and as I was driving more, I was getting really dizzy from driving, and I'm like, what is this, a visual issue? I don't know what's going on here. So I went to a chiropractor, and the chiropractor dug into my neck, basically, and just basically, in my opinion, dislocated all the joints in my neck. I was in a neck brace. The day I left there, my heart rate resting was like a 160. It's normally like it's normally 60. And I was like, what is going on? Why is my neck being injured causing my heart rate to go up? It didn't make any sense to me. And it's really because your vagus nerve also is located in your neck. So that's one thing, you're pressing on your vagus nerve. The other thing is that what I didn't realize is when those joints were dislocated, it caused this huge state of inflammation in my body, which then led to the histamines, which then led to the POTS. And it was this kind of cycle, which is that if you do something in the body when it comes to your connective tissue that the body doesn't like, it can send a systemic inflammatory response as a result, because your mast cells are in your connective tissue and they are paying attention to what happens, especially if those blood vessels are leaky on top of that too. So for me, this was a piece of my story where I was like, I don't get it. Why is my neck being injured causing my heart rate and dizziness and all of these? The dizziness made a little more sense, but that was really fascinating. The other piece that I know you're going to want to go into with hypermobility is that because we don't have the right dominant muscle groups working.
Yeah.
If a joint goes out of place, our body goes, how are we going to hold ourselves up? The structural components aren't there. So we start sending in other muscles to hold us up. And that's why you get that spasm. It's too much work for the back muscle to hold us up. So what we have to do is actually signal to our brain, use our core muscles and build our core muscles. And you can do that through diaphragmatic breathing, or you can do that through actually strengthening your core muscles.
A big example in my body and how it feels in my body is that when I bend over, you should be kind of stretching your hamstrings when you bend over. And when you stand, you should be engaging your hamstrings, right? This posterior chain of your body. But when I bend over, my lower back just goes, and just completely like on this strange hinge, just completely overextends. And I can overextend to the point where if I did bend over, I could put my hands through my legs and touch my lower back. I'm that flexible and bendy because I'm so hypermobile, which I did not realize.
Feature. Double jointedness is a key feature in hypermobility.
Yes, being hyper flexible, being the person in the yoga class who can stretch further than anyone else, which by the way, don't do that. Being the person who is double jointed, being the person who just, you bend in weird ways, your hands move in weird ways. It's hard to know that you're hypermobile. It's hard to like actually, be diagnosed with that because so many people aren't trained to see it.
Every single chiropractor, physical therapist, and personal trainer should do a 3-minute hypermobility assessment.
You should.
Because the way that you train is completely different than someone who doesn't have hypermobility.
100%. Yeah. And so now I've been realizing that as I've been training at the gym with a personal trainer, while it's great that they know how to train for a regular person, they're not customizing my training to someone who has hypermobility. And so when I'm doing glute kickbacks, for example, and I'm putting my leg all the way behind myself and overextending and subluxating my lower back, essentially, it's sending me into a huge histamine flare, and my eye is starting to twitch because my lower back is overextending because they're not watching for when my leg is going up too far. They're like, oh, farther. Oh, you can go that far. That's great. So it's a very specific, like you said, it's the fact that when your joints get out of place and are overextended, because your body can do that, the body's like, oh my God, let's not do that. We're afraid we're going to send out this inflammatory response in histamine cascade.
Absolutely. And then additionally, you're also not using the muscle groups that are most effective to use. So when your back is hurting because you relied on your back instead of your core to hold you up, and really picture this too, your joints are loose, you're like a bobblehead, right? Your joints are loose, and then your muscles are like, let me tighten so I can create that structural integrity in your body. But if you don't have muscle mass in the appropriate amount, and this is like a major shout out to Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, because this is the most important feature of all this.
Yes.
You need those stabilizing muscles to do that. If you don't have those, or your nervous system's not saying to use those muscles, then you're just going to be really, really sore and quite fatigued.
Yeah. Yep. And so that for me is why I have that posterior chain weakness, because my brain is not signaling to my hamstrings or my posterior chain or my glutes or even my core to hold myself up. And I'm relying on my knees and my lower back at all time to hold myself up. And in the whole grand scheme of things, the way that I as a layperson understand it, just to echo it back to people, and you should probably clarify because I don't know if I'll say it perfectly, but I almost think of like this road. How does someone go from a normal quote unquote body to having MCAS? And I feel like there's several ways in. One way in is having a hypermobile body, because regardless from birth, because you are hypermobile, because you have a connective tissue disorder where your body does not develop structurally the way that other people's bodies do, and thus you rely on the wrong joints or hyperextend things. From birth, you will be hyperextending your joints and moving in weird ways that other people do not. And thus your nervous system will constantly be activated as a result of that. And thus your immune system will follow that nervous system overactivation and will release histamines from your mast cells.
The one thing that's really important to note here is that people can be completely asymptomatic with hypermobility, by the way. Your joints can be bendy as anything, but if you don't have the viral piece or the nervous system or the immune piece, you actually can just be asymptomatic.
Okay. So let's say that someone starts off that way and they're hypermobile and they're totally fine. So for some people, the hypermobility is enough to push them over the edge. For some people, the hypermobility just alone can give you.
But you could also have, there's different types of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. You could have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, cardiovascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which means that your blood vessels connecting to your heart don't have connective tissue that help you to. So, there's very severe versions of this condition as well that are genetic. Absolutely. Yeah.
So then there's a person who is hypermobile but doesn't have any overt issues from it.
I had many years I was hypermobile and it didn't bother me at all until the
Until
mold, the COVID, the injury.
then you can have a mold exposure.
Yeah.
Then you could have a really bad body injury. You could have a really bad viral illness like COVID.
You could
Or
go on
mono.
a mold detox or a parasite protocol and create that war within the body like we talked about before.
You could push your body too hard on a protocol. Or you could have some sort of really traumatic thing happen to your nervous system.
Absolutely.
And after any of those things, this could have happened at age 12, at age 20, at age 30, at age 50. After any of those major life events, you could go from being a person who is, quote, normal to being a person who has now been so hyperactivated by any of those stressors that your body and your immune system and nervous system have not come down. And now you are in a constant state of Mast Cell Activation Syndrome.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So before we go into solutions, I just want you to touch on the anxiety and depression piece of it all. Because again, a big symptom that I experienced with histamines, and now that we've been working on my histamine load, I have had zero anxiety and my mood is just better than ever. I just feel content and normal all the time. And I don't think I ever felt a sense of true contentness before this. I was very depressed my whole life, but I feel good now. I actually feel good at baseline, which is so new for me. Why is there this black cloud or this depression that can happen as a result of a histamine flare?
Okay. So there's kind of, I would bucket the histamine symptoms into three kind of categories when it comes to mental health. Maybe anxiety, insomnia, and depression. I view all of these as symptoms, by the way. I don't view them in the diagnostic capacity that people are probably thinking of. I'm talking about having the experience of anxiety, the experience of depression, or the experience of insomnia. The experience of anxiety for people with histamine issues is extremely acute. And I call it like the ants crawling under your skin. It feels like there's ants crawling under your skin. You want to leave your body kind of feeling like you're like, oh, it's so uncomfortable to be in here right now. And you're very hyper state of arousal and you have to, it feels like talk yourself down a lot from it. The depression piece of the histamine puzzle is the way that my clients have described it is that it feels like there's a black cloud that covers your eyes like this.
Yes.
And it's like a cage.
It's
almost.
a heaviness. It's a
It's
weirdness.
a heaviness. It almost literally feels like it's covering your vision is how intense it is. And there's just no meditation or anything that seems to like lift it in any way. The reason why we've been so particularly obsessed with Pepsid, both of us, is because the Pepsid piece of it, we've learned that famotidine even acts on the vagus nerve to stop the cytokine storm from this. So there's definitely a component of brain inflammation, lack of blood flow that's closely correlated to all of this. But you really have to picture, like, anyone listening has probably, if they are still listening at this point, they've definitely had this experience. But it's like you really are a person who feels fine and then goes from feeling fine to one day feeling like you might need to be get interventions in a hospital setting for mental health.
Yes.
So it's extremely acute and it comes on really strong and it feels very unexplained and very unrelated to mental things. Now I just have to say, if you are a person who's experiencing any anxiety or depression, I deeply recommend that you see a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist. And I completely endorse any measures you have to take. So don't take this and say, oh, I can just take Pepsid or something like that. But it is truly fascinating how when it is a histamine type anxiety or depression, that taking one Pepsid or something can like completely lift the symptoms. And that tells you that's a histamine issue. If someone who doesn't have a histamine issue takes Pepsid, they're just going to feel nothing. They're going to feel like nothing. If someone has a histamine issue and they feel a lot better taking Pepsid, that's a good sign that that's a piece of it. And the insomnia piece, that third bucket, is you are literally wide awake. Your eyes are like this. And you want to be asleep really bad and you could be awake for an entire night and it feels untouchable and you are just doing things to calm yourself down for the entire night. And it's histamine's a very stimulating messenger. It's a very awakening messenger. So it's like the guy in the watchtower who's alert like this, you know?
And it's like you're laying there and you want to be sleeping and your brain is almost kind of half sleeping, but there's another part of your brain that's totally alert and awake.
The insomnia is particularly torturous. I feel like for people, it's extremely hard.
And when you said that anxiety or depression can just kind of like come on out of nowhere one day to the next, it reminds me of PMDD. This is something where at a certain part of a woman's cycle, it's like out of nowhere, you can no longer live in the world. Like you are just not okay. It is this complete dysphoria of your reality where it's like your brain switches And the rest of that woman's cycle, she might feel totally fine. But it's this really severe cloud of depression. And so there is some interesting research, right, surrounding Pepcid for this. And some people on Reddit have discovered that they can use Pepcid, a histamine receptor 2, H2 blocker, for this and get relief.
Yeah, it's so funny. Nikki, my staff dietitian, said to me recently, she goes, you know what? Is there like an endometriosis and histamine thing? And I'm like, major. And I called my friend Jillian. And I was like, obviously she works with clients, Jillian Greaves. She works with clients with endometriosis quite often. And she was like, oh, I have an entire like 80-page research deck about endometriosis as it relates to histamine disorders. We've talked about this group of people that kind of operate different from other people's bodies. And one of the weirdest features is that women in their menstrual cycle, normally people feel a lot worse, like PMS. People who have histamine issues feel worse when their period ends and then on day 21 of their cycle. So this is a dead ringer for me when my
I'm on day 21. Oh my God. I'm telling you, it's like from yesterday to today. I entered the cave of no return.
There's another little spike in estrogen. So the reason that all of these things are related is because as estrogen goes up, histamines go up. So that's a huge characteristic symptom set, is that when people, during your period, your hormones are tanked, your estrogen and your progesterone start rising. Estrogen's highest during ovulation. And really during that time, it's the climb up to ovulation that people experience the symptoms when your body's first doing it, because the second your estrogen starts building up, your histamine starts building up. So when there's women who experience crazy symptoms on like day 9 of their period or day 21, I had to learn estrogen as it relates to histamine. I know there are women listening to this right now who just went, holy moly, because the information is not accessible to anyone because it's not what people experience, and people don't even track their cycles to even know that enough.
Yeah, no, it's so true. It's these odd parts of your cycle where you shouldn't be feeling off, but it's because of that transition. Like you said, it's because all of a sudden estrogen is starting to rise. So you're going from a lower estrogen state to the body experiencing a transition, and it doesn't like that because it doesn't like change. And then, yeah, if you're someone who feels amazing while you're bleeding, which is literally me, I feel so good when I'm on my period because my hormones are the lowest that they are. So I have the lowest liver burden, the lowest histamine response to estrogen. You feel great. But in those days leading up to your period where there's that final estrogen push around day 21, which is my day today, you start feeling terrible. And that's literally from last night to today. It's like I started hitting my wall. So let's talk about solutions. What can someone with MCAS and a histamine problem do to heal?
Yeah. So the first thing you have to do is you have to know your body. You have to know your body. You have to know patterns. Again, Olivia can eat a jar of pickles. I can't look at pickles. It'll create such a flare for me. So the name of the game with all of this is reflection, slow down, reflection, and then starting to separate it. When people are in this extremely ill state, they feel like everything's going wrong. It feels like a cluster of pain, and the word used is torture. And Olivia, I think that's the right word. Yeah. It feels like torture, and they can't differentiate. What your job is, if you have MCAS, is to break apart your symptoms and start to understand where they might be coming from. Sometimes we don't know where they're coming from because it could be like a mental stress. It could be someone used bleach when they were, cleaning, and then randomly remember this, there's a lot of chemical sensitivities that can happen. Anything could happen. But really going back, and then I would just pull back on like all supplements. I would pull back and really vet out what's working, what isn't. Remember that people with these conditions are highly reactive to nutritional supplements. So they could literally be in a 5-day excruciating pain, diarrhea, dizziness, flare from taking a vitamin C supplement one time. So really the recommendations with supplements is pull everything out, and then you start with 1/8 of one pill once a week. That's how slow you have to go with histamine stuff. However slow you think you have to go way slower. In the beginning, to get rid of histamines, to help clear them, I was getting vitamin C IVs, 15 grams of vitamin C in my IVs, and mega B vitamins, because I was also extremely deficient in those things. And people with these conditions are often very deficient. Underneath all of this is also through the lens of mitochondrial damage, which means, again, that we're not able to generate energy for our body. So people will feel very fatigued. And for our liver to detox, we need a lot of nutrients. So we need these nutrients back. The problem is we cannot take a bunch of supplements when we're working on this stuff. The supplements I would recommend people take is any supplements that will help lower histamines. But if you go too hard on those two, the body's like, wait, I need to make these histamines. Don't try to force me out of it. So it's always good to ease in. So the first kind of step is acknowledge your pattern recognition. What is my body telling me? What is going on with my body? Pull back on everything. Then you have to lower the histamines. You have to find a way to lower the histamines.
Finding a way to lower the histamines, does that include perhaps limiting high histamine foods until you have a little bit more tolerance for them?
Yeah, so this is a really controversial and really important topic, which is, do we do low histamine diets, right?
And do we get stuck in them forever? Because that's another thing people just...
100%. Yeah, so the foods that are high in histamines are fermented foods, vinegar, citrus, tomatoes, spinach,
bone broth,
strawberries.
anything
that's aged, it gives the opportunity for a more bacteria, essentially, which is a good thing normally. Normally bacteria and antioxidants, these are all great things for the body. In the case of this, it creates a bit of a war, again, within the body. Anything that pushes detox or pushes de-inflammation can also push a histamine response, because remember, your immune system is very involved in this. So these are foods that are objectively extremely healthy. They're extremely healthy. In this population, they can cause intense illness. So I would say this. There's a couple different things we can do. You can take supplements that help break down histamines, like a diamine oxidase supplement, which is one of the enzymes required to break down histamine. You can do that if you want to eat the high histamine foods. I believe in the beginning, most people may need a low histamine diet. Again, we're talking about people, Olivia, who are probably unable to work because of how ill they are from these conditions. They will do anything. So it's really important to note that if you cut all these foods out of your diet, you end up cutting out a lot of the nutrients we need in the long term. So in the beginning, step one is lower those histamines. You might want to go on a very, very short-term low histamine diet, and I would really recommend that with a healthcare professional, or integrating supplements that might help to break down histamines within the body during a meal. And that the DAO would be within 5 minutes before a meal starts.
I will say, for whatever reason, as a high histamine person, I craved high histamine foods almost.
Like attracts like in the body, for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I was eating exclusively high histamine foods. Essentially, I was eating fermented foods and kefir every day. I was eating strawberries, pineapple, kiwi, and peanut butter, bananas. I was eating.
You're doing chocolate protein things on Instagram.
No, I was eating literally, yogurt. So that's fermented because there's bacteria in there. Yeah. I was eating exclusively a high histamine diet. I don't think I was eating one low histamine food. And so the shift that I initially made was just choosing fruits that were not histamine liberators or were not high in histamine, and just limiting bananas for a while, and just still having as much fruit as I was having before, but just choosing different fruits so that I wasn't getting those nutrient gaps.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, by the way, we forgot to mention, you're 100% right. Strawberries, bananas being very high in histamines, avocado being very high in histamines too. And really anything like canned, like olives and things like that. Aged things, wine being the biggest.
I cannot.
Histamine.
I can't
Most
even.
Most people don't really do that well with wine anyway. It's just quite hard to tolerate.
And the reason that it's helpful to limit these high histamines at first is because they kind of are in this positive feedback loop, right?
Yes. So very unfortunately, again, when you eat a high histamine food, not only does that then get broken down or not broken down and circulate within your bloodstream, it signals your mast cells to release more histamines for some reason, which is a very frustrating positive feedback loop that exists. It's not that these foods are inherently bad for you, and they're actually, many of them are extremely healthful for you, but it lets us know that someone who is doing everything right, they've gone to every doctor, they're eating all the fermented foods, they saw all the gut healing, gut cleansing stuff online. The person who's the best at being healthy is the person who gets the sickest when they have Mast Cell Activation Syndrome. And that's the truth. So the more you exercise, the more you eat citrus fruits, the more you eat fermented foods, the sicker you get.
So it's kind of having severe moderation in your life in every single area. Severely moderating your exercise to the point where you're never overdoing it, moderating your intake of high histamine foods, moderating your stress. It's needing to kind of take everything down a notch.
It's also needing to go against exactly what your body's telling you, which is really frustrating, because your body in the situation is like, I need you to eat high histamine foods. And you're like, no, I'm going to do the exact opposite of what you're asking of me. When you feel exhausted from POTS and you can't stand, it's like you actually need to recondition your body. So it's like a lot of it is unfortunately working a little bit counter to your body, but it's always babying your body to start with. Gentle, small moves, stripping things down until you get to the root and see what is going on underneath, because everyone's body's different.
Now, there's obviously nutrients, like you said, that are needed to clear histamine. Yeah. There's nutrients that are needed to support your liver so that your liver can clear histamine. And so we still want to be supporting ourselves. Are there any foods or tools that we can use to support liver detox that won't send us into a flare? Are there things like castor oil packs that we can do and start slow with?
So the problem is with detox, and when we kind of push these parasite protocols, detox, mold protocols, and kill protocols in general.
What about even like a liver, like a milk thistle or like a dandelion root?
Yeah, so that's I would say that's a different thing. There's things that support the organ of the liver, and then there's things that support the detoxification processes of the liver. And I think that things that push detoxification, like refilling B vitamins, glutathione, antioxidants, I think those can be actually even a little more harsh. So I think that there are definitely ways to gently support the liver. What I think we need to talk about too is the fact that the liver is the primary site of histamine excretion, and how we actually detoxify things is we have to repackage them and then send them out to different parts of the body. The problem is with long COVID, with all these conditions, there's a tremendous amount of inflammation and low mitochondrial efficacy, because the mitochondria might be damaged. So it means we don't get a lot of energy and we don't have those antioxidants to help our mitochondria within liver detoxification. So we need these nutrients really badly. B vitamins come really strong to mind when it comes to histamines, because they help with the methylation reactions, which help to repackage and break down histamines. But taking those supplements is not feasible for most people in the beginning of a histamine journey, because remember, they really have to lower the histamines first, and then they can add in those nutrients.
What about things like milk thistle or dandelion root that are just gently supporting the liver as a whole but not pushing detox?
I think it really depends on the person. Of course, it's not medical nutrition advice per usual, but it really depends. And I would say those are generally a bit better tolerated, as long as they don't instigate a very particular immune response.
What about things like a castor oil pack, where it's even almost a step away, a step removed, because it's something that's topical and a little bit gentler?
Yeah, I think of castor oil as being a component of both drainage and detoxification. I think if you have a problem with either detoxification or drainage, as in you get stuck in phase 1 of detoxification, it can be a concern. I definitely find a lot of clients do have histamine reactions to castor oil packs. It does push detoxification, but it's also tremendously helpful. So it might be something that you want to start with maybe 2 minutes of leaving a castor oil pack on and then gently working your way up. But of course, there's many ways in which castor oil can be very helpful with histamines.
Now, I remember you telling me and warning me that if I went to get a lymphatic massage, I could very easily go into a histamine flare. And in my mind, I was being stubborn, and I was like, well, I need to support my drainage. I'm clearly very swollen because I was having a histamine reaction. So I thought that a lymphatic massage would be great. And that night, I went into such an anxiety spiral, did not feel like myself. I felt like my brain was in control of someone else. And it really pushed me too far. So this is what you're talking about with the fact that if someone does go too far with even a massage or with detox protocols or even with something like a castor oil pack or milk thistle, they can go into a much more severe symptomatic histamine picture.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, the one thing about hypermobility that we were talking about before too is people who have hypermobility should not get upper cervical neck massages at all. That's something that's extremely important for me to say, because it's really dangerous and really scary if you have that. And I want people to protect their necks when they especially are hypermobile or known to be hypermobile. And so certainly if you are doing something like lymphatic massage, which influences drainage, you are instigating a lot of changes, not only in your fascia, but in your like connective tissue and your lymph. And yes, it is going to instigate and promote a detox reaction. So anything that is good for you in the long term might be really hard on the body in the short term.
Any of the good wellness practices that we know are very beneficial, period, are going to be hard for these folks. So it sounds like really taking away as much as possible while trying to get in those nutrient-dense foods that aren't going to push us.
I mean, it's funny because if someone's in a severe mast cell or POTS flare, they're like, Michelle, you think I'm getting a lymphatic drainage massage? I can't even get off my couch right now. I literally can't do it because the symptoms can be so severe that there's different levels of, severity for different people. But I think we do often look to like infrared and cold plunging and all of these things that are definite stressors and that are potentially or definitely good for us. But we really have to take into the context, the condition of the body as it is now. That's the most important thing. Like if you can't handle walking a block, I would not say go into, doing a cold plunge for 5 minutes or something like that.
In light of how sensitive we need to be and how much we need to actually take away and simplify for the body as part of the solution section, we're not listing off a bunch of supplements and things to do. There was a time where you told me I was in such a flare and my digestive system was really affected, and you had told me to kind of just mono meal it for the day. Just for one day, just do Japanese sweet potato in this meal and then my protein in the next meal, and then maybe some rice and then protein in the next meal, so that I just wasn't even eating complicated meals. How simple do we have to go, especially when we're in a flare?
Yeah, so this is like a little hack that I have for people, which I've like coined mono meals. Basically, it's actually a variation of food combining, but basically I have people just eat one type of food at each meal. And this is when you're in a severe flare and digestion is very compromised. You almost want to feed your body like a baby bird, you know? It's like almost pre-chewed at that point, like really as simple and easy as possible, just to make digestion as absolutely low energy as possible. Keeping in mind, all of these conditions are categorized by challenges to our mitochondria, challenges in creating energy and gaining energy from the food we eat, malabsorption issues. So we're not getting those nutrients. So eating slowly and eating maybe just, again, eat a little protein and then later eat a little bit carb can be so gentle on our digestion too. Yeah. And this population has a huge problem generally with eating enough, especially because you can have a lot of fluid retention, which makes it feel like you're gaining weight. And so people don't want to, and appetites are poor because of acid reflux and those kind of things. So it's really important to get food in a safe way that feels good for people.
You had even mentioned it's important to have the right posture when eating, right? Because of the reflux piece and the hypermobility piece.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you think about if we're eating hunched over, like I certainly do all the time, you're smushing your organs together, right? You're not giving your body a chance to actually let food go down this very complicated pathway, you know, and get absorbed and move through digestion. So digestion and absorption. So it's so important the posture we have while we're eating. Also realizing that, again, these are disorders of the nervous system, which we're going to do a whole episode on how these are disorders of the nervous system. So acknowledging that parasympathetic activity while you're eating is so important.
Now, in terms of the things that certain folks with the guidance of an MCAS-informed practitioner might be able to add in, you had mentioned DAO, the enzyme that one could potentially take with a high histamine meal. You know, if you're like, you know what, I got to have these beautiful seasonal strawberries, you maybe take some DAO. You had also talked about some other supplements that can help to degrade histamine. What about quercetin?
Yeah, I think quercetin's quite well tolerated by most people. There's a bunch of histamine-specific supplements that will have a combination of stinging nettle and quercetin and ginger. That's a really good, beautiful combination. And you can, I'm sure, speak to the herbal components of that as well. Yeah. But yeah, those are three that are generally well tolerated and usually well tolerated in the beginning because they are all histamine lowering or inflammatory activity lowering.
Like fusions, as in cytokines, like inflammatory mediators as a whole.
Yes, exactly.
So just getting that whole storm down.
Yeah, and also ginger is just so supportive from an immune perspective, inflammation perspective. So things that are modulating without instigating, I would say, is important.
Yeah, I do think that in terms of the ginger conversation, although I love ginger tea now that I understand the level of reflux that I have to be a little bit more careful with it. And I do find that ginger in capsule or even like a glycerite tincture form is easier on my stomach and reflux than a ginger tea.
Yeah. Many of my clients can't tolerate the ginger tea. They have to do it in the capsules if they can. But, you know, and when we think about all of these conditions from a TCM and our Ayurveda perspective, there is a lot of issues with air and fire, right? That I think of it in the context of functional medicine. If the fire is already burning, you don't pour fuel on the fire. As in, if you don't have reflux already, you probably can tolerate ginger tea or ginger. If there's a fire burning with inflammation, it's going to burn. I mean, it's going to burn, and it's going to burn higher.
But this is what's so important is that most folks with MCAS are having some level of reflux and not even realizing it. 100%. So while ginger is a wonderful antihistaminergic herb, you know, it's really a wonderful herb to support the liver, to support just the inflammatory response that's driving that histamine release. You do have to be careful maybe with form. And I think because glycerite tinctures are very soothing and are just not as hard as even a powdered capsule, glycerite is, I think, where I'm going to go with my ginger world.
Love that.
And I usually will take it with aloe, just so that I'm kind of creating a little bit of balance there. I'm getting in the
aloe's
phytonutrients.
Fantastic for
histamines. Let's just talk about aloe a bit, because the stomach yin portion, you need that moistening and that lubrication, that nourishment of the mucus in the stomach. And so something like aloe, why is it so helpful?
It's just, first of all, from a a feeling perspective, right? It's just so cooling. And that's really so important with all of this. Also, there's just so many studies that substantiate aloe specifically to help with immunity and autoimmunity, to dampen the intensity of the immune response.
So just going through again this list of treating those symptoms and also the effects of MCAS, like the reflux. You mentioned aloe. I would also just bring in the thought of marshmallow root infusions.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. So yeah, we talked in the supplement, the histamine supportive supplements, they usually have some stinging nettle. Nettle leaf tea is something that I never travel without. I'm drinking it on the airplane. I get a cup of hot water from like a Starbucks or any coffee shop. And then I'm putting, because I don't like to drink the hot water from the containers on the airplane, obviously. Major no-no for me. But so I'll get the hot water from Starbucks, and I'll put 2 nettle leaf tea bags, because I'm not going to bring like loose leaf tea, obviously, on the airplane with me. And then, like Olivia said, you can put marshmallow root powder right in it. So soothing. Nettle leaf tea is so incredible for histamines. It is, you can feel a difference from drinking it. It works really well for most of my clients. And then adding some marshmallow root extract into it, it's fantastic for just soothing that lining of the gut.
I also want to note that in the herbal world, nettle leaf tea, not only is it helpful in the short term because it's also stopping that inflammatory cascade, but it also takes time to stabilize your mast cells. Right. So in your first week, 2 weeks, 2 months of drinking nettle tea, it's not necessarily going to have that deeper effect on your mast cells. In herbalism, we have to drink nettle infusions every day, very large amounts of it for like 2 or 3 months before allergy season even begins, if we want that to be a viable
3 months
therapeutic.
is the number.
Yeah.
So 3 months is the number. Here's the scary but not so scary part about all of this. The scary part is that once those mast cells degranulate, which means they let out those mediators, they're out already, right? So then you're really dealing with the symptoms of it. Usually it takes about 3 months to clear that. So you can get symptom reduction really quickly, actually, which is really good. I want people to know that. It's not like you can't get symptom reduction. All you're going to care about is symptom reduction when you're not feeling well, right? Yeah. But in the long term, for you to kind of change the course of things and to really process out those histamines, it does take a bit of time. Yeah.
Okay. And then also you mentioned to me anything that's going to help to repair your endothelial lining, because I'm sure there's some damage from the reflux and just also the connective tissue piece.
Yeah, not even the endothelial lining only in your gut, the endothelial lining throughout your blood vessels and the rest of your body too. So it's like an inner lining in like much of the vessels of your body. Repairing that is really, really important. And that takes a lot of those nutrients we were talking about before, like the B vitamins and everything like that too. Really
B vitamins, zinc, copper. Could someone just
Collagen.
do for now like some eating more oysters? Could that be
Sure.
reactive for them?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think eating really mineral and nutrient dense foods would be a tremendous place to start, actually.
Yeah. Oysters, some liver.
Yeah, I don't know if people can tolerate oysters if they have histamine issues, but liver's a little better tolerated, I would say. A lot of shellfish is immune active for people with histamine issues, though.
Wow. You also mentioned reconditioning the body, really getting those true stabilizer muscles, the core strengthened, the posterior chain strengthened. But obviously there's a way to do this, and there's 2 facets to it. One is protein intake, which can be difficult for people with histamine issues, and 2 is working out in a way that is sensitive to your sensitive body.
Yeah, absolutely. So the protein issues come through because people have acid reflux. And when we have acid reflux, we tend to not want protein foods as much. In addition, the breakdown of protein is a very intensive and energy intensive process in our body. If your body's exhausted, people just feel like the protein's sitting there. They don't feel like they're breaking it down and utilizing it as well. One very important feature of why we need to eat protein in our diets is because protein will ultimately become something called albumin, which is a protein that is throughout our bloodstream, and albumin helps to modulate blood pressure. So it's really, really important to have adequate protein so that you can have adequate albumin. Being a dietitian, and when we were in school for all this, albumin was a constant conversation and focus. Gabrielle Lyon would love this, by the way, because it was really like one of the biggest markers of mortality. You would look at someone's albumin score. When you would see someone's albumin dropping, when I was working in nursing homes, that was a huge sign that they were declining, because it's a sign of overall health status as well as protein status. And so it's so important to get protein so that our body can make albumin in the liver to help modulate and regulate. That being said, people have poor appetites. They can't stand on their feet long enough to cook oftentimes. A lot of the protein foods, if they're leftovers will create more histamine. Anything older in age, like wine, chocolate, bone broth, those things, those are going to have a greater histamine impact probably. So in the fresh meat, though, people do generally pretty well with, but it's really hard for people to
cook fresh meat every day.
That's rough. It's really hard.
And just to make a note, I don't think we clarified the reason that leftovers have more histamine is because leftovers build up bacteria.
Yeah.
And anything that has more bacteria is going to give you a greater histamine reaction. That's why fermented foods are such a source of reaction.
Yeah, it's just exactly. Yeah. So yeah, that's such a big conversation, the bacterial piece, but that is part of it, is that, again, even having good bacteria can still create an immune response.
Even a probiotic.
Exactly. Oh yeah, probiotics cause crazy histamine responses. Yeah. Absolutely. You have to be really careful about that, and supplements. That's something in supplements that I have people be extra careful about when they have histamine issues.
So eating fresh food, if possible, is a really...
if possible, though, and within reason. And if you can't, maybe having like a DAO supplement with your meal or something to kind of help to process some of the histamines in it. And there's many ways to do that as well. Yeah.
And then speaking of adequate protein intake and albumin, is it wise to try to include albumin-rich sources, things like egg whites that are highest?
High biological protein foods, absolutely. And a lot of animal products are that. And then you mentioned egg whites, which are like the highest biological value protein. Like it's almost 100% protein and very, very rich in albumin.
Why is it important not only to have our protein intake high, but to make sure that we're eating enough carbs when we have MCAS?
This was like a fight we kind of had, Liv, by the way. Yeah, I think carbs are our nervous system's preferred fuel source. So they are cooling, they're calming, they are strengthening, they are how we build muscle. You know, if we think about glycogen stores also in our muscle, it's glucose plus H2O equals glycogen. We are a group of people who are very needing energy and needing quick energy. And fat and protein are slower sources of energy, and we are already struggling to make enough energy. So cutting out vital fuel sources for your brain and for your nervous system is not the way to go. So carbohydrates are essential in this population.
And carbohydrates also lower cortisol.
Absolutely.
Which is a big piece, because when we're allergic to stress, which is what MCAS is, we are always stressed, and any little change or any little thing that goes wrong in our bodies or in our days can lead us into a further stress immune spiral.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think even going too long without eating can be a stressor for these folks. Like really making sure you have adequate, consistent fuel, because also the longer you go without eating, the more potential for reflux there is, because you're producing stomach acid.
More potential for reflux, more potential for every type. Again, even not eating for a long period of time could cause your body to go into cellular cleanup, which is something that you might not be ready for either, right? Like we just want to like baby bird it. That's what I would really say. Like really easy, really simple, really easy to digest foods.
So in terms of the strength training piece, you have to go as slow as possible, but do you still need to lift?
Totally. And I mean, I would work with a hypermobile specific trainer if you can, if you're going to work with a trainer, obviously. There's also online courses for hypermobility, a couple really cool programs, but Taylor Goldberg, like we mentioned, is my trainer too. And it's really focused on how do you get the nervous system to activate the right muscle groups, combined with you must recondition 100%. Yeah. It's because when you're also working out, you're also activating the blood vessels to operate in a different way. It's not only that you're temporarily doing that, you're doing it in the long term, changing the inflammatory process, everything. It's just so important. I do not believe you can get out of any of these conditions without reconditioning and strength training.
And here's the thing. Yes, you must build and maintain your muscle. It's absolutely dire. Even if you are exhausted, you have to do those little things, even like you said, working out in bed, doing some Pilates in bed if you can't get up and lift your head. But you will know, and as you start to even acknowledge if you have this condition, or you start to work with someone and you start to track your symptoms, you'll understand the way that your body acts when it's going into a histamine flare, or when it's unhappy, or when you're pushing it too hard. Because MCAS's whole spiritual job, if you want to look at this illness spiritually, is telling you when you've pushed it too hard.
Yeah.
And so when you start to know your signs, for me, it's the eye twitch. Like you said, for you, it's the tremors. You'll have that very specific, weird histamine symptom. And you will feel when you're in the gym and you're pushing it too hard, you'll get shaky. That's my first thing. I'll just get like a little bit shaky. And
Absolutely.
you don't need to be in the gym pushing yourself to the point where you're shaky. If you have MCAS, just don't leave it to the bodybuilders. They can do that.
Do less than you think you can do and need to do. Always do less.
Yep. And once you start to feel that eye twitch or whatever it is, you've already gone too far and you have to stop and you have to go home.
The hardest part of this whole thing is that, again, we think about this trip I went to Ojai, eating my oranges. I'm doing Pilates. These are healthy things. We need these things in the long term. But the problem is in the short term, we cannot tolerate them. So you have to go way lower, way slower than you ever think you need to. And that's how you build. What a lot of people want to do when they have hypermobility is build a bunch of strength. And then what happens is they get injured. And then they're not able to do anything. And then you're in a bad position. So it's always better. It's always better safe than sorry. And I'm just constantly communicating with my body, like, hey, how we doing here? You know, constantly checking in, constantly seeing how this movement feels versus this movement. I'm never craning my neck and, you know, being really careful and conscious during my workouts too. And there are times, certain times of the month where it's just like, it's a no-go. And it just is a no-go. And it's having a lot of grace for yourself, but still challenging yourself. It's still really important.
Okay. I love that. Before we get into your final kind of like step-by-step plan for healing that involves tracking your patterns, let's just touch really quickly on the Western solutions that one might use with a practitioner in the very short term, just to get out of that initial histamine storm.
Yeah, so there's different classes of drugs that work on different types of histamine receptors. So, you know, I say that with a lot of clients, what they may do under medical advisement is like take one type of one drug and then one type of another, which means like you take Zyrtec, which is an H1 drug, versus like a Pepcid, which is like an H2 drug. Everyone reacts completely differently to these drugs. There's some people who can't tolerate them at all. Yeah. There's many functional medicine practitioners who are vehemently against taking any Western medicine. Yeah. I feel like the symptoms are so extreme and severe that I have to leave all tools on the table. So people will generally take them like every 12 hours in the beginning, and then you won't need them anymore. Like I, for instance, I don't even need Pepcid anymore or anything like that. I just don't, you know, but I'll still take like a Zyrtec once in a while. You know, it really depends on where the person's at. But there are many practitioners I know who utilize that almost always in MCAS clients. Okay. If they find it necessary.
So it'll be for a set period of time, then you either no longer need to use them or can just use them on an as needed basis.
Yeah, you can use supplements instead of them. But obviously, like, we are dietitians, so we're not giving medical advice. It's just what people can get over the counter and what makes them feel good, and they have to listen to their own bodies and work with their doctors on that too.
And they would only be prescribed that by a doctor to just block the histamine. It's not actually reversing or addressing any of the root causes whatsoever. It's just blocking
the only thing is that one of the root causes of histamines is production of histamines, because then your body goes, histamines, more histamines. So it kind of does help at the root
it almost
cause.
Gets you out of the vicious cycle in the beginning.
Right. And getting you out of the vicious cycle also gets you out of a nervous system cycle. You have to stop it somehow, right? Yeah. And that's the reality of this stuff. You have to stop the symptoms somehow. People are suffering. You have to let them have every tool possible.
Yeah. Okay. And now, step by step, if someone's going to sort of leave this episode and have some sort of a game plan to start understanding their own body's response to their mast cells and start understanding their symptoms, their cycles, when do I get bad in my menstrual cycle? How does my body show me that I'm pushing it too hard? What is your step-by-step plan starting with that pattern recognition?
Yeah, so you know how I started to do pattern recognition? I started to look at my Reddit searches, and I was like, why day 9 cycle feel bad? You know, like just the most like funny, ridiculous things that I was writing. I was like, why itchy on airplane? You know, like I just like look at your own Reddit searches and look at your own Google searches and see why you keep asking the same thing. I also love tracking apps. Like if you are a woman who menstruates and does some sort of like cycle tracking, I put the symptoms in, and then I have such relief when I look back and I go, oh, every time, day 9, I always throw my back out on day 4, day 9, I always feel weird and anxious or whatever it is. Just tracking somehow, somewhere, even if it's the note section of your phone, ate this, kind of felt weird, and look at everything like data. Don't say, now I can never eat this food again. You know, just look at everything like data and start there, basically. Yeah. So that would be the first thing. And really, again, because Olivia, we have we both have these conditions, but we have completely opposite bodies, which is so insane. Down to the point where I'm like, sometimes my joints are like bony and out of place, and yours are like, we're like, where are your joints? Like, what's going on? Yeah, exactly. Like, we joke about it.
Joints.
Exactly. Which is like but we have such different manifestations of it that something that's going to bother me is not going to bother you. Though I will say this, both of us feel really good and really validated when we see something that someone else has experienced that we've experienced, because it makes us feel not alone. So in this episode, you know, generally when you do podcasts, when any of us do podcasts, the goal is to like kind of get to some symptom resolution or some solutions, and we gave some. But what I want people to really understand is that when you're listening to this and what we've said feels like your nervous system's healing. Yeah. That's all you had to do was listen to this episode and just know that your symptoms make sense in the context of you, and how you feel is important, and you should never be gaslit for how you feel, and what is going on is real. I just want people to know that. And just your body hearing that is more valuable than any like supplement in the world. And that's the truth.
I love that you're grounding people in the nervous system co-regulation piece, the understanding that they're not alone piece. And that is truly how we're going to move forward. Like we keep saying, this is an illness of the nervous system. It is a sign from your body that something has pushed it too hard and it needs to do things a different way. And we are there with you guys listening who are resonating with all of this, learning how to do things a different way. And there is a solution, there is a way out, and it involves regulating ourselves together, finding safety and regulation in the body, and learning how to access that sense of safety consistently. And part of that is knowing that you're not alone. So I just want to thank you so much, and I want everyone to know that we will be coming out with a part 2 episode that covers all of these different strategies that you can utilize to find that safety in your nervous system. So thank you so much, Michelle Shapiro, for being on the show.
The joy is mine. I can't wait for the next episode.
I hope that episode was so validating and so illuminating for all of you out there with a highly sensitive histamine body. And I hope that it gave you the answers that you have been looking for in the health and wellness world for so long. That is how I felt the first time I heard Michelle speak and the first time that she explained all of this to me. And now that I'm able to really focus on strategies that lower my histamine levels and that stabilize my nervous system, and I've been able to start saying no to things in my life because I understand that my nervous system is my true root cause, my life is truly starting to change. It's a really wonderful feeling. So I want that for you guys too. Like we said, we're going to do a whole follow-up part 2 episode about the nervous system and what it looks like to regulate your nervous system in order to bring that high alert immune response down and get those histamines lowered. So I can't wait for that episode to come out. I'll probably collect questions from you guys on Instagram before we record that, now that you've had a chance to hear this, and you might have a bunch of questions. So keep an eye out on my Instagram. And like I mentioned in the intro, if you do want to learn more about living in a highly sensitive body, if you want to learn more about hypermobility and learn stretches and stabilizing exercises to help you with your hypermobile joints and hyperextensions, if you want to learn more about the herbs and the supplements that we talked about in this episode and how and when to use them to help manage your symptoms, you can head over to Michelle's Highly Sensitive Body Hub. It's like a course, almost like a mini university that you have access to that has a ton of different modules and videos from different practitioners who have firsthand experience with MCAS. So like I mentioned in the beginning, you can find my herbal modules in there. I go through all the different classes of herbs that are supportive to those with MCAS and histamine issues, and I break down individual herbs, how to use them, what form, and when. And it was really fun to do that deep dive and even look at the science on some of the herbs in terms of what histamine receptor they block and how they stabilize our mast cells and how they lower inflammation. So it was a great learning experience for me, and I've been able to use those herbs for my own health to start managing things and getting me on the right track. So again, I'll put a link to that in the show notes, and we'd love to have you in there. And I can't wait for part 2. Thanks for listening, guys. Have a good one. Wasn't that great?